Timeless Assassin. By author Raj_Shah_7152. Chapter 961-980. Chapter 961 Taunts. Execution Livestream Continuation. The Pit, Leo's POV. The universe watched with bated breath as Raymond confronted Leo, the demigod having a cocky expression on his face as he tried his best to humiliate Leo in front of his followers. I don't have all day here, Skyshard. My offer expires in 30 seconds, so decide fast. What will it be? Will you kneel and save your men? Or will you stand and fight like your mentor Charles before you? Raymond asked, as his expression turned from one of contempt to one of exhilaration. Oh yeah, I remember Charles. What a terrific guy. What a terrific fighter. I'm sure you loved him dearly. Raymond continued, as he began to casually stroll with his hands pulled behind his back. In my opinion, he was one of the best fighters the cult has produced over the past few centuries. A true pillar of your resistance. Raymond added, as he made a fist with his free hand and looked towards the sky, as if genuinely trying to sound respectful as he made these comments. However, the slight laughter in his voice still gave him away. It's a shame that he had to die. I mean, if only he kneeled like I had asked him to. Maybe I could have spared him as well. And maybe Planet Juxta would still be around. Do you know how many had to die that day just because of one selfish decision that Charles made? TCH. What happened back then was undoubtedly a true tragedy. If given a choice, I would never want to do something so cruel. However, Commander Charles forced me into a corner. Raymond said, as he stared straight into Leo's eyes and smiled. He chose to defy me, and so, I cut him piece by piece like the dog he was and gave him a horrifying death. Raymond said, his voice rising now, as his eyes widened with glee. I gave him a horrifying death and then I destroyed the entire planet his remains rested on just for good measure, just so that not even a memory remained of the once defiant Commander Charles. He boasted, as he widened his chest with pride. Charles was a veteran commander. A survivor of many wars. So just imagine, if I can do that to him. Just how badly can I hurt you? Raymond asked, as it was at this moment that Leo snapped. With rage fueling his movements, he rushed towards Raymond in what looked like reckless abandon. However, the moment he did so, Raymond unleashed two more attacks. One aimed towards Vare, while the other was aimed towards the cult army, as he forced Leo to make a choice yet again. Save Vare, save the army, or pursue his revenge. However, he could do only one of the three. Meanwhile while Raymond mocked Leo, Supe looked at the devastation left behind by a single one of Raymond's slashes and felt his gut clench in revolt. That was my legion, he thought, breath catching in his throat as his eyes traced the ruin carved across the battlefield, where evacuation lines had ceased to exist and disciplined formations had been reduced to broken geometry and scattered remains. Most of these men and women were under my protection. The realization hit harder than any physical blow, as the screams still echoed faintly in the air, cut short too abruptly, too cleanly, leaving behind a silence that felt obscene in its finality, as bodies lay where they had been running moments ago, expressions frozen between fear and despair. Shake. Supe's hands trembled. Not from fear. From shame. He had trained these soldiers. He had drilled them. He had promised them that as long as they followed orders, as long as they trusted the cult's command structure, someone would always be there to shield them from the worst horrors of war. And yet, a single slash, one careless gesture from a demigod drunk on power, and 12 million were gone. Gulp. Supe swallowed hard, his chest tightening as bile rose in his throat. His eyes burning with hatred as he refused to look away, as he understood that if he allowed himself to turn aside even once, then this moment would rot inside him forever. I was supposed to protect you, he thought, nails digging into his palms hard enough to draw blood. As fragments of armor and torn banners fluttered weakly in the disturbed air, mocking the ideals they had marched under. Around him, surviving soldiers stumbled in shock, some screaming names that would never be answered, others standing frozen with hollow eyes, weapons hanging uselessly at their sides as their minds struggled to comprehend a loss of that scale. And behind it all, Raymond laughed, a shrill laughter that made one's bones vibrate with anger, as that sound alone snapped something inside Supe. Fuck you, he thought, as anger surged upward like a flood breaking through a dam, drowning out grief, suffocating hesitation, and burning away fear until only a single, searing resolve remained. No, he thought fiercely. Never again. As long as he lived, as long as his heart still beat and his blood still flowed, he would never allow something like this to happen without resistance, without consequence, without defiance. I am Su Pei. The name steadied him. I have divine blood flowing through my veins as well. His jaw clenched, spine straightening as something ancient stirred. Within him, pride inherited from a lineage that had dominated the universe for eons as well. If Raymond is a descendant of a god, his gaze locked onto the demigod standing amid the carnage, then so am I. The realization did not make him stronger. It did not erase the gap between them. But it gave him something far more important. A reason to stand. The least I can do, he thought grimly, is ensure this never happens again. At least not on my watch. He swore, as moments later, the air distorted once more and divine essence surged violently from Raymond's blade. Slash. Su Pei felt it before he saw it, the pressure alone enough to make his bones ache and his instincts scream for him to run. A second slash. Another arc of annihilation. This one aimed straight for another section of the cult army. As in that moment, Su Pei knew instantly and with brutal clarity that this attack was beyond him. That its weight surpassed anything his body or current tier could possibly endure, yet his feet moved anyway. As pride overrode survival. As duty crushed fear. As the will of a Su clan descendant surged through his veins. Step. He stepped forward, planting himself between the oncoming destruction and the soldiers still scrambling behind him, shoulders squaring as he raised his shield with shaking hands, divine blood roaring in protest and defiance alike. Even if I can't stop it, he thought, breath steadying despite the terror clawing at his chest. I will not stand aside. He decided, as taking in a deep breath, he shouted at the top of his lungs. Don't worry men, as long as I'm alive, you will all be safe behind me. Chapter 962 Unsung Hero. Execution Livestream Continuation, The Pit, Leo's POV. For a heartbeat, Leo hesitated, his eyes tracing the arcs of both attacks, as in that single stretched moment where the world seemed to hold its breath alongside him. His mind split down two brutal paths, where one future showed him turning away from Ver to chase the wider arc of annihilation, while the other demanded that he once again prioritize the life of the dragon. Eyeballs curving, frown lines appearing, millions of lives weighed on one side, while on the other, there was just one. A life heavy with meaning. A life they had already sacrificed so much to save. Clench. His jaw tightened, muscles screaming in protest as he forced himself to calculate under a pressure that threatened to tear his focus apart, as the memory of 12 million dead burned behind his eyes and the thought of letting even more follow made his stomach churn. I can't do this again. The thought barely had time to form when movement flickered at the edge of his perception. A figure stepped forward, who he recognized as Su Pei. Good, Leo thought, as he saw it in the corner of his eye. The man planting himself between the cult army and the oncoming destruction, shield raised with shaking arms, posture rigid with resolve as he shouted at the top of his lungs that he would keep everyone behind him safe. Exhale. A soft breath escaped Leo before he could stop it, as a tiny burst of relief flooded his system. Thank you, he thought quietly, as the decision was ripped from his hands and resolved by another's will, allowing him to move without hesitation or regret. As he pivoted sharply and threw himself into the path of the remaining strike aimed squarely at Ver. Roll. Grit. Leo dove into the arc at an angle that bordered on reckless, daggers flashing as he twisted his torso and caught the edge of the attack, redirecting it upward with a violent wrench of his entire body. Clang. Screech. Pain exploded through his arms instantly, muscles seizing as the backlash tore through him. A sharp cramp locking his shoulder mid-motion as he stumbled on the landing, teeth grinding as he forcibly shook the stiffness loose while still moving forward. He didn't stop. He couldn't. Hobbling for a single step, Leo straightened, blood dripping from his knuckles as he forced his body to obey, eyes already locked onto Raymond as killing intent hardened into something cold and absolute. I can't allow him more time to play these games again. I need to commit to this attack. And I need to do it now. He concluded, as he used Storm Flash Traverse to close in the distance between himself and a superior opponent within a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Su Pei. The moment the second arc descended, Su Pei felt the world narrow into a single, unbearable line of pressure, as the air ahead of him compressed so violently that even breathing became an act of resistance, his instincts screaming at him to move, to dodge, to abandon the impossible position he had chosen. Yet his feet did not budge. As the slash approached, Su Pei drove his shield into the ground and activated Iron Fortress mana surging outward from his core as layers of reinforced shielding wrapped around his body, his stance lowering instinctively as he braced for impact. Thrum mmm. The strike hit, and in that instant, Su Pei understood with terrifying clarity that his body simply was not strong enough to endure the blow head-on, and while Leo could deflect such an attack with ease, it was beyond anything he could currently hope to replicate. I can't block this. The realization settled in fully as the force pushed through Iron Fortress like it was paper, the edge of the slash beginning to bite inward, compressing space, mass, and will all at once. If this continues, I'll be cleaved clean in half. The thought landed with unsettling calm as pain exploded through his arms and spine, nerves lighting up in cascading failure as cracks formed across his shield's surface and blood surged violently through his chest. At this moment, every rational instinct screamed at him to disengage, to step back, to preserve his life. But behind him the cult soldiers were still running, still carrying the wounded, still trusting the promise he had shouted only moments ago, and hence, he refused to step away now. No, Su Pei rasped, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth as his teeth clenched hard enough to crack. No, I will not give up. He reaffirmed, as the pressure surged again, threatening to crush his organs into pulp, as he forced his shaking legs deeper into the ground and activated indomitable will to ensure he could not back out of this defense now. FSHHHHH. Almost instantly, he felt a boost in strength, as indomitable will provided strength to his failing muscles. However, while the skill provided him with some much-needed strength, it also locked his legs in place, meaning there was no turning away for him now. Arg, come on now, come on Su Pei, show them what you're made of. Su Pei shouted in pain, as he tried to motivate himself to stand tall till the end. However, as the seconds passed, blood started to drip from his mouth, his ears, his nose and even his eyes, as it became evident that he was straining his muscles to their very limits now. Just a little more and I will overcome this, he muttered, as he tried to trick his mind into holding on for just a few seconds more, until crack, something inside him broke, an internal organ rupturing from the strain, as blood sprayed across the inside of his shield. Wet cough. Splat. I will not move, he reminded himself, even while his arms trembled violently and his spine screamed, as he refused to budge till the bitter end even if it meant courting death. However, suddenly shatter. After a full 30 seconds of him enduring the attack alone, it was actually Dumpy intervening and stepping in beside him to shoulder the blow that finally relieved him of his pressure, as the divine arc in front finally collapsed into fragmented energy, meaning that the soldiers behind him were finally safe. Told you. You're safe behind M, he mused, before falling unconscious, as thud. Exhaustion and injury claimed their due, his battered body hitting the ground face first, as Dumpy nodded his head in pride beside him. You did well here, Su boy. I will personally recommend you for the position of the Skyshard family guard after this war ends. Dumpy muttered, as he slung Su Pei's unconscious body over his shoulders and took a big leap to instantly transport him to the nearest medical ship. Chapter 963 Playing Their Parts. Execution Livestream Continuation. The Pit, Ver's POV. Ver watched Leo move again, watched him throw himself into danger without hesitation, watched him bend his own limits for the second time in under a minute just to keep Ver standing, as something inside his chest twisted painfully as the realization finally settled in. This wasn't protection anymore. This was liability. Every time Raymond struck, Leo adjusted. Every time death reached for him, Leo stepped in. Every time the battlefield demanded sacrifice, Leo paid the price instead of him. I'm holding him back. The thought came uninvited, sharp and merciless, as Ver clenched his fists and felt how little strength answered his call, how shallow his aura felt compared to the titans clashing around them. He wanted to help. He wanted to stand beside Leo, to strike Raymond together, to repay even a fraction of what had been done for him. But he knew better. Charging in now would not wound Raymond. It would only force Leo to split his focus yet again, while also granting the devious demigod another lever to pull. I wouldn't be helping. Vare swallowed hard, jaw tightening as shame burned through him. I'd just be another weakness for him to protect. The truth was suffocating. For all his titles, for all the fear his name inspired as the dragon of the cult, in this moment he was powerless, stripped down to a body that could barely endure the pressure of the battlefield, let alone shape it. Why? His vision blurred slightly as his shoulders sagged. Why am I so useless? The thought echoed hollowly, unanswered, until something else caught his attention. His pupils dilated. The ground beneath his knees. The soil. Red. Dark. Heavy with iron and residue, saturated with the aftermath of divine conflict. Vare's breath hitched as his hand brushed against the folds of his robe, fingers grazing something soft and unmistakably familiar. A flower. Still there. Still intact, tucked carefully where he had placed it long ago, untouched by chaos, untouched by blood. Right. His breathing steadied. Even if I can't fight, there is still something I can do. He thought, as resolve replaced despair. Thud. Almost instantly, he dropped fully to his knees, ignoring the tremors running through his legs, as he plunged his hands into the red soil. Beneath him, scoop. He grabbed fistfuls of earth, rough and gritty against his palms, and began pulling it up desperately, dumping it into his robe as he gathered more and more, folding the fabric inward, twisting it, shaping it into a crude, makeshift bag. Scoop. Dump. Scoop. Dump. Handful after handful, he kept collecting as much as he could, because he knew that this soil was worth more than anything money could pay for. If I can't stand beside him today, then let me at least ensure that I give him a smoother tomorrow. Vare thought, as he collected the second crucial ingredient required to brew a demigod potion, knowing full well that Leo might need it someday soon. Meanwhile as Leo handled Raymond and the cult army retreated back into the transport crafts, Soren finally lured the righteous gods to the heart of the pit, to the destination he wanted them all to arrive at, so that he could perform his final duty as the cult sect master. This is it, this is the spot I'm supposed to open the fourth dimensional portal at, he thought, as he weaved through a wave of long-ranged attacks, and a dangerous thrust by Caliph which missed him by the breadth of a hair. Swoosh. The attack breezed past him, as he tried to counter by slicing Caliph's neck off. However, before he could do so, it was Morris who came in for the block, as he saved Caliph's life with a gleeful expression on his face. Clang. Not today, the deceiver said, as their origin metal weapons collided, only for Soren to roll through and disappear within a moment. Seconds walk. Despite being battered and at the door of death, Soren controlled the battlefield still, as he slowly but surely isolated everyone from Helmuth, in a way where he could create a pocket where no one could interfere between the two of them. However, while all the great clan gods now fought at a cautious distance from him, it was only Morris who became a constant annoyance, the deceiver not giving him the final bit of space he needed to execute his plan, as he lingered annoyingly close. What's your plan here, cult master? Why haven't you run away yet? Surely you don't think you can push us all back forever? Morris asked, his expression intrigued, as he tried to strike a conversation while fighting. Swoop. Roll. Dodge. Dodging through yet another wave of attacks, Soren pretended as though he had not heard Morris at all. However, the deceiver still continued to talk as though he did not care for Soren's indifference. While I don't understand how you walk between moments, what I do understand is that altering the flow of time even by the slightest margin consumes a tremendous amount of divine essence, which should most definitely surpass your rate of regeneration. I remember vividly even back in the day that the timeless assassin never fought long wars. He was an assassin precisely because his battles were short and decisive, which is why I am intrigued as to how long you can keep up this offense. Morris asked, as Soren could not help but smile as to how accurate his assessment was. Walking between the seconds indeed consumed tremendous amounts of divine essence, and he had almost run out now, which was why he had to make his move now. However, what Morris did not understand was that he did not plan to run away, that he did not care about retreating, which was why he did not mind fighting till his reserves ran out completely. You think I won't run away? Soren asked at this moment, his eyebrow raised as he tried to bluff all the gods surrounding him, as he opened a portal to the fourth dimension, as if trying to run away, when in reality, it was the trap he meant to lure Helmuth into. 94.44 degrees. Thrum. Chapter 964 Perfection. The Heart of the Pit, Helmuth's POV. /THRUMM. The moment Soren opened the portal to the fourth dimension, something inside Helmuth snapped. Rage drowned out reason as he surged forward with reckless abandon, instinct screaming louder than caution. "Oh no you don't. Soren, you coward. I'm not finished with you yet." He roared as he hurled himself between Soren and the portal, determined to block his escape at all costs, never realizing that in doing so, he had stepped exactly where Soren wanted him to stand. Soren was not foolish. The angle of the portal, the position of his body, the way he shielded himself from Morris and Kalith while leaving Helmuth unchecked, none of it was coincidence. For although he did not want Morris or Kalith interfering, he did want Helmuth there, between him and the portal, exactly as he was. Now. Helmuth swung his massive axe in a furious arc, his aim being to cleave Soren's head clean off his shoulders before he could run away, and for the briefest instant, it seemed as though he could succeed. Time slowing. Blade approaching. Soren stood there until the final nanosecond, until the very last moment the strike should have connected. But then he was gone, as for a single heartbeat he left nothing but empty space behind, as Helmuth's wild swing missed its intended target. Swoosh. Helmuth stumbled off balance, the strength behind the strike pulling him forward, as it was his own movement that forced Morris and Kalith to abort their individual attacks, so as to not be caught in his uncontrollable arc. Stumble. The axe missed, Helmuth stumbled forward, his balance broken by his own momentum, as in that same instant, Soren reappeared exactly where he had been before, time snapping back into place as though nothing had changed. Except everything had, as Soren hesitated no more. Slam. Kick. Soren drove his heel into Helmuth's chest with brutal precision, pouring everything into the strike as he sent the berserker god hurtling backward. Swallow. The fourth-dimensional portal devoured Helmuth the moment he crossed its boundary, space folding inward as the berserker god vanished, his eyes wide with confusion, as he failed to comprehend as to why Soren would attempt something so meaningless. After all, Helmuth could simply force his way back out. Or so he believed, as what he did not know, and what Soren knew all too well, was that someone else was waiting for him on the other side. Throw. A breath later, Soren hurled one of the Grudgekeeper daggers into the portal just before it collapsed, the blade vanishing into the fourth dimension in silence, as he took a slightly hopeful gamble that was more of a prayer than a plan. If Multheric succeeded in overtaking Helmuth, perhaps the ancient dragon would pass the dagger on to Leo when the time came. And if not, then the blade would be lost to the endless void alongside everything else that had ever fallen between dimensions. As despite knowing the risks, Soren knew it was his best shot at passing the dagger on, or at least ensuring that it wasn't handed over to the enemy after his death. Swoosh. Slash. The very next instant, the battle continued as though nothing even happened, as Soren weaved through yet another barrage of attacks coming his way, his eyes full of excitement, as he knew that he had finally completed his last duty as the cult sect master, and that he had to fight for no one but his own revenge from here on out. What did you do? Why did you kick Helmuth in? And why did you throw your dagger after him? Morris asked in a confused voice, as even now the deceiver could not understand the motivation behind Soren's actions. However, Soren did not care to explain, his lips slowly turning upwards as his killing intent flared for one last time. You want to know why I did that? He asked, his voice low and powerful. Come try extract the answer over my dead body. He dared, as he charged like a man who had nothing left to lose anymore, with his one last Grudgekeeper dagger still in his hand. Meanwhile, inside the fourth dimension. For a brief moment, Helmuth felt confused and annoyed as to why Soren would push him into the fourth dimension for no reason. However, just as he felt like it was just a flimsy trick to buy time and was ready to force his way back out, a suffocating pressure pressed down on his back, so dense and ancient that even his divine instincts recoiled, as though something far older than him had just placed a hand upon the constitution of his soul. You've come a long way since I last saw you, boy. The voice did not echo. It pressed. Helmuth stiffened, then slowly turned, his irritation giving way too. Dawning recognition as his gaze locked onto the colossal form looming behind him, scales the color of dried blood and molten iron. Stretching across a body that seemed to be fused into the fourth dimension itself. Multheric. The red dragon's golden eyes burned like twin suns, focused and predatory, as they did not radiate fury or haste, but rather the patient certainty of a creature that had destroyed entire galaxies before Helmuth had even learnt how to crawl. As for a heartbeat, the space between them vibrated. Thrum. For a while, Helmuth simply looked into Multherac's eyes, stunned, before then breaking into a genuine hearty laugh. Ha! Ha 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 ha. A deep, guttural chuckle rolled out of his chest, carrying equal parts amusement and respect, as realization finally snapped into place as to why Soren had kicked him in here. So that's it, Helmuth said, straightening as his irritation melted into something sharper. That's what your aim was throughout our past exchanges. You were setting me up for this moment here. His grin widened, so that you could feed me to him. Instead of retreating, instead of bracing defensively, Helmuth rolled his shoulders back and let his own killing intent pour outward, unrestrained and savage, as his berserkers will sharpened by countless wars and victories flared around him like a raging storm. Thrum. The fourth dimension shuddered. Space rippled and warped as two ancient pressures collided head-on. Invisible forces screaming against one another as Multherac's primordial aura met Helmuth's berserker wrath, the clash sending fractures of distorted light racing across the void like cracks in glass. Sorry to disappoint you here, old bones. But you can take your grip away from my soul, for regardless of how hard you try, I will never yield my body to you. Helmuth said, his expression stern as he asked Multheric to back off while he still could. However, contrary to his expectations, Multheric did not even pause for a heartbeat to consider his words, as instead he started the soul annihilation procedure at once. Your threats have no bearing on me, young child. I have been without a body for too long now and will stop at nothing to obtain one. I will either walk out of the fourth dimension today with your body as my new vessel, or I will die here in the fourth dimension after being reduced to nothing. But one way or another, I will be set free for sure. He said, as he wasted no time and lunged towards Helmuth, his red, formless soul invading the berserker's body, as the two became embroiled in a test of wills on who could endure the annihilation of soul power longer. Chapter 965 A Fake Messiah. Meanwhile, back near the execution platform. At the same time as Soren pushed Helmuth into the fourth dimension, Leo launched himself toward Raymond in a head-on charge. That's it, boy, come at me. Raymond thought, as rather than surprise or concern, Raymond felt a slow, almost indulgent amusement stir within him at the audacity of a mere monarch daring to attack him alone. Come and witness the gap between us, Raymond mused, a faint curl of satisfaction spreading through his chest as he watched Leo close the distance between them without hesitation. Shuffle. Planting his feet, he shifted his stance rather casually, as to him there was no need to prepare for a serious clash when the outcome was already decided, and so he simply waited, watching Leo appear before him in a blur of distorted space as Storm Flash Traverse carried the cult's shadow dragon into his reach. Slash. The instant Leo slashed upward toward his throat with both daggers, Raymond calmly raised a single finger coated in dense divine essence, his movement casual and unhurried, as though he were brushing aside an irritation rather than intercepting a killing strike. Shirk. The collision was sudden and absolute, as Leo's blade screeched violently against the condensed divinity surrounding Raymond's finger, his forward momentum dying on contact while the backlash rippled straight through his arms and shoulders, rattling bone and tearing at muscle. Push. Forced to retreat, Leo took a couple steps back, however, much to his horror, Raymond was already at him, as the demigod refused to give him the luxury of distance. Too slow, cousin, Raymond muttered, as he punched Leo square in the face, the impact blanking Leo's mind for a moment as he was sent back flying, the impact crushing his nose and fracturing his facial bones. Crack. Splat. A streak of crimson blood poured out of Leo's nose, as by the time he regained his footing and refocused his vision, Raymond was already before him, the demigod's blade aimed straight for his throat. Shit, Leo thought, as he used Fade Step to barely dodge Raymond's attack on time, the movement skill teleporting him behind Raymond as he attempted to counter with a strike of his own to the back of Raymond's neck. Shirk. Block. Once again, using a single finger, Raymond blocked the incoming strike without so much as turning, as he casually tilted his neck and gave Leo a mocking look as if to say, "You're not at my level, pal," as Leo found himself forced to retreat at once. Step, step, pant. Creating distance, Leo wiped some of the blood dripping down his broken nose, while also sizing Raymond, as the demigod let out a low and amused chuckle. "Ha, ha 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 ha," Raymond said, as rather than laughing a natural laugh, he laughed a forced one which sounded shrill and agitating to hear. "Is this it? Is this all the great Leo Skyshard is capable of? Come on now cuz, I've heard such wonderful things about you. Aren't you the cult's shadow dragon? The successor to both Commander Charles and Uncle Soren? Aren't you the demon of Omega? So why are you so weak? Come hit me with your best." Raymond mocked, as Leo steadied his breathing and nodded his head. Despite how it appeared, the battle up till now had unfolded pretty much exactly how Leo had wanted it to unfold. For now, he had a rough gauge on how fast Raymond could move, and just how big the window of opportunity needed to be for him to end the demigod's life. "Come on and show me some of the cult's forbidden moves. The legendary techniques that you cultists have safeguarded for over 2 millennia. That move you used to slip behind me. That was a good one. Show me more of them, and maybe I will reward you just like I rewarded your beloved dragon when he used to be my teacher back in the Eternal Garden." Raymond muttered, as he saw Leo's pupils dilate in shock. "What? He didn't tell you? Oh geez. I guess he could not convey the message while he was being held as a prisoner. However, the moment we isolated him, he began to sing like a canary and cooperate, selling all of the cult's secrets just so that he could have good food to eat and a warm bed to sleep at," Raymond said sadistically, before using shapeshift to turn into Ver's form, so as to prove that the dragon had indeed betrayed the cult and shared confidential information that he wasn't supposed to. What a spineless coward he is. The revered cult dragon Aegon Ver. I cannot help but pity you and your followers who traveled all the way here to save your Messiah, when in reality your Messiah had already sold his soul to us long ago," Raymond said while still being in Ver's form, as he shook his head in disappointment. "Believe me when I say, we were doing you a favor when we were executing him live, because such a spineless and moral-less individual was truly a burden on both sides. However, alas, you and Uncle Soren had to stupidly intervene. And now, we are left with this mess," Raymond said, as he slowly shifted back to his own form, his clever eyes glinting with mischief as he tried to overwhelm Leo's psyche. "Even more. I can tell just by crossing swords with you once, Skyshard, you're not as spineless and weak as Ver. You're a true blood carrier of the timeless assassin and the embodiment of the cult's defiant spirit. Which is exactly why I will now be emasculating you live in front of the whole universe, for an example needs to be made of someone so that the fear and respect we command remains intact," Raymond said, as he gripped his blade tight, divine essence surging outward in thick, suffocating waves, as his intent pressed down upon the battlefield with crushing weight, promising pain, humiliation, and a lesson that the onlookers would remember forever. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 966 Temporal Shift. Execution Livestream Continuation, The Pit, Leo's POV. Leo still remembered the day he had dauntingly infiltrated the Black Serpent's Guild's sealed vault, slipping past layers of security that had been designed to repel monarchs and thieves alike, until he laid his hands on one of the cult's lost techniques, the fabled temporal shift. At its core, temporal shift was a movement technique that pushed a body to speeds approaching nearly half that of light. And in execution, it was a technique that did not merely rely on raw velocity, but instead folded space inward around the user, compressing distance into something that could be crossed in a single step, making it the fastest form of movement that a mortal body could theoretically endure without instantly tearing itself apart. According to the skill scroll, the technique was technically usable by those at the monarch tier or above, as beings at that level possessed bodies strong enough to survive the catastrophic backlash of performing the technique at least once. Yet what had truly baffled Leo when he first studied the requirements for the move, was how one of the most important catalysts needed to ignite such an explosive motion was named to be divine essence. The scroll stated it plainly, as though it were obvious, explaining that the burst of acceleration required to fold space and momentarily override inertia could only be achieved through divine essence acting as the stabilizing and driving fuel behind the technique, which in practice rendered temporal shift unusable to anyone below the demigod tier. As for a long time, it was this very contradiction that gnawed Leo's mind and made him feel as though he could perhaps not learn this move as a monarch. No, this can't be right, he had thought at the time, as he pondered about the secrets of the move. If this is the strongest movement a mortal can perform, then why does it require divine essence to function at all? He wondered as the logic simply did not align, because a technique meant to define the upper limits of mortal capability should technically not have relied on a resource that mortals fundamentally lacked. And yet, despite memorizing the circulation pattern, the spatial compression method, and every line of explanation within the scroll, Leo had never been able to bridge that gap, never able to see how one could perform temporal shift without first transcending into godhood, until the day he encountered the second elder and was imprinted with the dragon's mark, granting him access to an entirely different form of energy called life essence. It was only after that imprint, and after his exposure to the cult's second forbidden technique, that the puzzle began to resolve itself, as the second forbidden move acted as the conceptual key needed to unlock the deeper mechanics behind the 15th technique, a realization that did not fully crystallize until Leo began training under Multheric himself. "The tattoos on your body are funny, boy," the ancient dragon had remarked casually one day, while the two were training to open a fourth-dimensional tunnel, his massive eyes tracing the faint gray markings beneath Leo's skin. "They remind me of young king-tier beasts who haven't yet learned how to process divine essence properly, and end up suffering temporary circuit discoloration," the dragon had said, as while the comment had seemed offhand at first, somehow it stuck with Leo with the force of revelation, because in that moment he finally understood what life essence truly was. Maybe, all divine essence is a more refined version of life essence. He conceptualized, as he shifted his perception of divine essence as something ethereal and started to see it as the purest fuel source possible. If it's just refinement that I'm lacking, then maybe, if I experiment with different dosages of life essence, I might be able to replicate desired effects. He theorized, as although he understood that it might not be easy, he kept trying again and again, until he eventually learnt how to perform temporal shift with life essence as the core fuel. So this is why the cult's second forbidden move was created. It wasn't created to master other techniques faster or to tier up faster. It was always meant to be fuel. A means to learn temporal shift as a mortal. Leo realized at the end, as it was only after he unraveled the secret himself did he realize the true intention of the timeless assassin behind making the 15 forbidden moves. Back at the battlefield, as Leo saw Raymond mock him with the utmost confidence, he could not help but calculate through a myriad different scenarios to somehow stun the demigod, as he knew deep down in his heart that if he played his cards right and performed temporal shift from close range, that not even Raymond would ever see it coming. I just need to create a single opening, just one single microsecond of absolute certainty, where I know I can end him. Leo thought, as his gaze sharpened. Sigh. Parallel processing. Letting out a deep sigh, Leo activated parallel processing as the chaos of the battlefield dulled and was instead replaced by a picture of Raymond alone occupying his perception. I do not need to overpower him. I do not need to outlast him. All I need is one decisive attack. Temporal shift coupled with crown fall, and I can end this bastard. Forever. Leo thought, his grip tightening around his daggers just as Raymond's hand closed more securely around his own, both of them preparing for what would come next. At this moment, Leo did not care for what Raymond said. Did not care for whether or not Ver had really betrayed the cult or not. Did not care about whether or not this whole war to come save Ver was a mistake, as all that really mattered to him was to end Raymond's life and avenge Charles, because that was the least he could do for his dead mentor. Chapter 967 Cult Master Soren. Meanwhile, as Leo prepared to take down Raymond, Soren began to introspect his own body one last time, carefully estimating just how much gas he still had left in the tank. 5 minutes at best. After that I will be unable to maintain god-tier strength and will begin to unravel in real time. He assessed calmly, as he drew in a slow breath and tightened his grip on the only remaining Grudgekeeper dagger in his hand. Clench. Boom. His killing intent flared outward without restraint, washing across the battlefield like a tidal wave as the space around him distorted, cracked, and folded inward under the pressure of a man who had long since stopped caring about consequences, his smile widening even as his battered body protested the surge. "Come then," Soren said lightly, as though inviting children to spar rather than facing 7 gods. As the response he received was immediate. Yukiro was the first to pull back, spear glowing as he hurled long-range thrusts compressed into beams of divine force, while Ruvasa cast out a complex web of spell formations, chanting rapidly as layered sigils bloomed into existence and rained destructive magic from every angle. Boom! Kaboom! Blast! Luhan and Mu Shen followed suit, blades cutting the air as crescent-shaped slashes tore forward, while Dutrask, clutching his ruined forearm, forced himself to contribute from afar, pouring everything he had left into wide, desperate strikes meant to overwhelm through sheer volume. As through the carnage, only Morris and Kalith advanced to face Soren at close range. Step. Swing. Morris stepped forward with that ever-present grin, the block of origin metal floating at his side like a loyal hound, while Kalith blurred in and out of space, twin origin daggers flashing as he tried to pressure Soren from unpredictable angles. Slash. Swoosh. Dodge. The duo tried to corner Soren through their teamwork, however, unfortunately for them, it did not matter, for Soren moved like the wind. Seconds walk. Walking between the moments, Soren dodged attacks at the very last instance, before then reappearing where no one expected him to be, as instead of focusing on the gods charging towards him, he suddenly moved out and attacked the great clan gods instead. "Oh fuck no," Yukiro muttered as he saw Soren planting a foot atop an energy spear he threw, as the cult god defied the laws of physics and used that metaphysical spear as leverage to vault himself unexpectedly towards Kalith, as he changed directions once more. Slash. The Grudgekeeper dagger sang. Kalith barely had time to cross his blades before Soren was inside his guard, the origin edge slicing across Kalith's shoulder and chest in a single fluid motion, as it carved a deep and permanent damage as blood sprayed and Kalith was hurled backward, crashing across the terrain with a scream that echoed far too long. Arg! Before anyone could react, Soren twisted again, reality bending around his pivot as he appeared in front of Mu Shen mid-charge, the Swordmaster's eyes widening just in time to see the dagger bury itself into his side. Splat! The wound was not fatal, but it was absolute, origin metal poisoning the flesh instantly as Mu Shen was sent tumbling away, clutching his ribs in disbelief as regeneration failed him entirely. "You're too slow," Soren laughed, genuinely amused, as Ruvasa's spells detonated behind him, fire and void crashing together, yet Soren simply walked through the aftermath, grabbing the incoming sword slash from Luhan with his bare hand, before then hurling the god bodily into Dutrask, the collision sending both skidding across the battlefield like discarded tools. Skid. Thud. Panicked, Yukiro tried again, spear splitting into a storm of afterimages, only for Soren to step between the seconds and appear into his flank, as the cult god kneed him hard and momentarily broke his divine ribs before vanishing once more. Crack. Morris alone remained close, blocking, redirecting, laughing, yet even he was being dragged along rather than controlling the exchange, his origin metal barely keeping pace as Soren danced around him with reckless delight. Drip. Drip. Black tainted blood dripped from Soren's countless wounds. His breathing grew heavier, and yet his smile only grew wider. This was it. These were his final moments. And he intended to spend them reminding the universe as to why his name had forever been spoken with fear, as he carved his will into reality itself, uncaring of how much of himself it cost, because if he was going to die, then he would die laughing, surrounded by gods who would never forget the feeling of being utterly and completely outclassed by just one cult master. Meanwhile Kalith, after receiving the wound across his shoulder and chest, Kalith staggered backward before finally managing to steady himself, his boots grinding against shattered stone as a sharp, unfamiliar heaviness settled into his body, the kind that came not from exhaustion but from the terrifying realization that the damage carved into him was not going to fade. Wince. The pain was slow to bloom, yet absolute once it did, as origin metal bit deep into flesh and circuitry alike, rejecting regeneration with cruel finality, as it forced Kalith to press a trembling hand against the wound while warm blood slipped between his fingers and stained his armor beyond recovery. Nothing had changed. Centuries had passed. Power had been accumulated. Allies had been gathered. And yet, standing here bleeding from a permanent wound, Caliph was forced to confront the same truth he had once been crushed by. A young kid on Ixtal. Even now, he was not Soren's equal. The realization gnawed at him harder than the injury itself, as resentment, fear, and wounded pride twisted together inside his chest, his grip tightening around his dagger until his knuckles went white. I need to end Soren today. Anyhow. The thought crystallized into something cold and unyielding, as Caliph straightened despite the pain, his expression hardening with grim resolve. If I cannot kill him today, with the help of all these gods. His eyes narrowed, tracking Soren's movements with renewed intensity. Then I will never be able to kill him. Too much had already been lost. Too much blood had already been spilled. And returning to the eternal garden empty-handed after this humiliation was not an option he could accept. No matter the cost. No matter what it took. Soren needed to fall today, for if he did not, then Caliph stood to lose everything he had accumulated over the past 2,250 years. Chapter 968 Farewell. Brother. For the next 3 minutes, Soren continued to dominate the space around him, as he fought the most vibrant battle he could, burning through what remained of his divinity with reckless joy, until a violent cough finally tore its way out of his chest and rattled his internal organs hard enough to make the air shudder. Cough. Choke. Black tainted blood poured from his mouth in thick, unstoppable streams, splashing across the shattered battlefield like spilled ink. And yet Soren laughed through it, his lips pulled into a grin that bordered on manic as he twisted past a spear thrust and clipped a retreating Yukiro across the ribs purely out of spite. Slam. So this is where it ends. The thought was calm, almost fond, as he felt something vital begin to slip. This time, the strength did not come back. Divine regeneration faltered, then failed outright, as though his body had simply decided it had done enough. As internal organs that had been repaired thousands of times before now tore apart and stayed torn, bleeding freely without resistance. It began in his legs as a simple sprain, as movement that should not have been a burden for his divine legs, suddenly started to ache and hurt, as his muscle fibers felt unnaturally strained. Ah, there you are. He thought, as the tremor spread, muscle fibers screaming and snapping beneath his skin as divine power fled from them fast. Tremble. With divine regeneration failing, the years of origin metal poisoning finally began to destroy everything inside his body, as divine circuits burned themselves hollow without the essence needed to sustain them, causing the effortless rhythm of his movement to fracture, as seconds walk degraded into something imperfect, strained and mortal. Slash. A spear that should have missed tore a shallow line across his thigh. Boom. A spell that should have exploded in the background hit his shoulder instead, as shocked gasps echoed across the battlefield. He's slowing down. Yukiro shouted, disbelief giving way to feral excitement as he saw blood remain where it fell. His regeneration isn't working. His shoulder is not healing back up, he's done for. Ruvasa cried, her eyes wide as she hastily reconfigured her spell formations, greedily pouring more power into them. This is it. Dutrask roared hoarsely, pain forgotten as he forced his ruined arm to steady. If we push now, we can end this. The pressure changed instantly. What had once been cautious distance turned into a desperate rush, as long-range attacks tripled, while beams and sigils screamed through the air toward Soren from every angle, as the sharks finally sensed blood in the water. Boom. Slash. Kaboom. Soren felt them land. Fire blistered his skin, tearing it open in ragged patches that refused to close, as void magic gnawed into his side and stripped it down to raw, exposed flesh, while a crescent slash carved across his back and remained etched there without healing. As extreme pain spread through his body from head to toe. Drip. Plop. Blood soaked his robes, dripping freely from his fingertips before pooling on the ground below, and still he smiled, his spirit remaining defiant till the very end. I've done everything I wanted to do, he thought, amusement bubbling even as his vision dimmed. The only thing left is to die with a smile, so that you bastards never have the satisfaction to see me sweat, he thought, as his legs finally gave out. Thud. Splat. One knee slammed into the broken stone hard enough to fracture it, a shockwave rippling outward as he drove the remaining Grudgekeeper dagger into the ground to remain upright, his breath now ragged and wet, as each inhale scraped through lungs that were actively failing. The battlefield froze for a heartbeat. Then Caliph moved. The eternal sovereign did not hesitate, did not shout, did not grandstand, as he closed the distance in a blur and drove his origin dagger straight through Soren's chest and into his heart, pinning him fully to the ground. Stab! Soren gasped sharply, more in relief than pain, as warmth flooded his chest and his strength finally vanished completely, his fingers slackening as his body slumped forward against the blade. The noise faded. Spells ceased mid-cast. Weapons lowered. 7 gods watched in silence as the impossible finally happened. Soren looked up at Caliph, their eyes meeting in a way that stripped centuries of hatred down to something raw and intimate, something that felt uncomfortably like a farewell neither of them had ever planned to give. As surprisingly, no triumph lived in Caliph's gaze at this moment. Only exhaustion. Help me take my vial, Soren rasped, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth as he fumbled weakly at his dimensional storage ring, his movements clumsy, uncoordinated, mortal. From it, he produced a transparent vial, its contents faintly luminous. His trembling hands barely able to hold it, as he asked Caliph to help him take it in, knowing full well that if any god would understand the importance of doing this, it would be his brother. Clench. Caliph caught it, his expression one of disgust as he stared at the vial for a long, terrible moment, then down at Soren's face, at the familiar smile that still refused to fade even now, even with death already tightening its grip. Memories surged unbidden. Their childhood at Ixtal. Laughter. Rivalry. Blood. Finally, Caliph exhaled, a sound heavy with 2,000 years of unresolved grief, as he uncorked the vial, before carefully, almost reverently, pressing it to Soren's lips, as he tipped its contents into Soren's mouth, his hand steady despite the tremor in his eyes. Farewell, brother, Caliph whispered, as Soren swallowed with effort, his breathing slowing at last, as the pain that was a constant accompaniment to him for 2 millennia finally ebbed into something distant and manageable, his smile softening into something peaceful. As he stared up at the ruined sky. The scars I've given you won't let you sleep in peace, Soren murmured faintly. Good luck living, brother, he said as his eyes closed, as he let out his final relieved breath. Sigh. The battlefield remained silent, gods frozen in place, as Soren's body finally went still, the will that had bent reality itself extinguishing quietly, as it left behind 7 survivors to live with the scars of his memory forever. Chapter 969 An Opportunistic Thief. For a while, no one moved. Every god paid their final respect to a formidable foe, as they looked over Soren's fallen form with complicated emotions rising in their hearts. The battlefield suspended in a silence so dense that even the drifting ash seemed reluctant to fall. Soren lay where he had collapsed, one knee pressed into fractured stone, one hand slack near the grudgekeeper dagger embedded beside him, his face disturbingly calm, while the faint curve of a smile still lingered at the corners of his lips as though death itself had failed to strip him of his defiance. Rue Vasa was the first to avert her gaze. Her arm lowered slowly, fingers tightening into a knuckle as relief washed through her in a delayed, trembling wave, the kind that left her weak rather than triumphant, as though a terrible weight had finally been lifted only for the emptiness beneath it to be revealed. Soren was gone. The nightmare had ended. And yet, beneath that relief, a crawling unease took root in her chest, because Soren had fallen alone, while Caliph was still alive. The universe always needs a villain to rally around. With Soren gone, who will take up that role next? Rue Vasa wondered, as she uneasily hoped that it wasn't herself or her clan, a quiet dread settling deeper in her chest as her eyes finally lowered. Luhan did not look away. His sword tip rested against the ground as he stared down at Soren's body, eyes narrowed not in hatred, but in disbelief, as though part of him still expected the cult master to rise again, to laugh, to brush the dust from his robes, and remind them all that men like Soren did not simply end. You were the best warrior I had the honor of crossing blades with. Perhaps if this were another life, we could have been friends. Luhan thought, as he let out a deep, measured sigh, his eyes still wide with disbelief, as he struggled to process the death of a god, even if he was an enemy. Glance. Shuffle. For a while, nobody said anything, until suddenly, Morris moved. Bursting forward with sudden, irreverent speed, Morris slipped cleanly between Caliph and Soren's corpse, his motion so smooth it was as though space itself parted willingly for him, his laughter bubbling up bright and inappropriate against the gravity of the moment. Ah! Morris chuckled almost fondly, as he brushed past Calith's side without sparing him so much as a glance, his attention locked onto a single object with predatory intensity. The Grudgekeeper dagger. Clench. His hand closed around the hilt with unmistakable hunger, fingers tightening as though afraid it might vanish if he hesitated even for a breath, the origin metal humming faintly as it accepted his grip, its weight settling into his palm like a long-awaited prize. Slide. I did it. It's mine, he declared as he emerged on the other side, his expression one of glee as he lifted the dagger, admiration shining openly in his eyes as he turned the blade to catch the light, inspecting it as one might a relic torn straight from legend. My, what a marvelous thing to leave behind, he said, his voice thick with mockery, as all around him, chaos began to unfold. The moment Morris lifted the Grudgekeeper dagger into clear view, the unease that had been simmering beneath the surface snapped violently into motion, as every god present instinctively understood the same truth at once, that an origin metal weapon, especially one as formidable as the Grudgekeeper, was not something that could be allowed to rest in the hands of a psychopath like Morris. Ruvasa felt it first, a sharp tightening in her chest as her gaze locked onto the dagger, her relief from moments earlier evaporating into cold dread, because whatever balance Soren's death had restored was now threatening to collapse all over again. That blade, she muttered under her breath, fingers twitching unconsciously as divine essence began to gather at her palm. He cannot be allowed to keep that. Luhan's grip tightened around his sword as well, his instinct screaming just as loudly, because a god-killing treasure did not merely represent power, it represented leverage, fear, and the ability to rewrite hierarchies that had stood for millennia. And if the great clans were to ever rewrite the dynamics of universal power, it was absolutely crucial that they secured themselves one. Calith turned sharply, eyes narrowing as he finally registered what Morris had taken, his jaw tightening with barely restrained fury, because that dagger had never been meant for the deceiver, and Morris stealing it so blatantly made him mad. Morris, Calith said coldly, his voice carrying a warning edge. Put it down, he warned, as Morris only laughed in response. The sound was light, almost playful, as though they were children arguing over a toy rather than gods staring down the barrel of a future catastrophe, as he casually shifted the dagger in his grip and stepped back half a pace, already reading their intentions with effortless clarity. Oh come now, he replied cheerfully. Don't look at me like that. He's dead. I merely picked up what was left behind, he justified, as at that moment, everyone lunged at him at once. Yukiro moved first, spear flashing as he lunged in with a swift, precise strike meant not to kill, but to disarm, his attack honed by centuries of battlefield instinct, yet Morris was already gone before the spear could even graze him, slipping aside with a fluidity that felt deceitful. Whoosh! Ruvasa followed immediately, layered sigils snapping into existence as she tried to bind Morris in place, threads of magic converging to lock his limbs and sever his movement, only for him to twist mid-step and let the spells pass through the space where he had been standing a heartbeat earlier. Luhan joined the fray, sword flashing in a controlled arc meant to knock the dagger free, while Dutrask, ignoring the agony in his ruined arm, forced himself forward to add weight and pressure, their combined assault converging on Morris from three angles at once. Clang, snap, burst, and still, they failed. Morris danced through them like a shadow with intent, his movements sharp, economical, infuriatingly precise, as he used the chaos of their overlapping attacks against them, letting one strike disrupt another, stepping into blind spots that should not have existed, laughing all the while as though this was the most entertaining game he had played in centuries. Careful now, he chided lightly, parrying Luhan's blade with the flat of the dagger's hilt, the origin metal ringing out with a sound that made every god flinch. You'll hurt yourselves. Calith snarled and closed in personally, twin daggers flashing as he aimed to overwhelm Morris through sheer proximity, their blades colliding in a rapid, violent exchange that sent sparks and fragments of distorted space flying outward, yet even then, Morris never loosened his grip. No matter how they struck, how they pressed, how desperately they tried to pry the dagger from his hand, it remained there, locked into his grasp as though it had chosen him in that moment, humming faintly with a resonance that made the air feel thin. As slowly, the dreadful realization finally settled in. They could not take it from him. Not quickly. Not cleanly. And certainly not without consequences. As Morris finally disengaged and took a few leisurely steps back, Spinning the Grudgekeeper dagger once before settling it comfortably at his side, his grin widened, eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he took in their frustration. "Oh my," he said softly, almost reverently. "You all look so worried, just as you most definitely should be." He teased, as he stored the dagger away in his storage ring, and stood as though the matter was already concluded. Chapter 970 Revenge is a dish best served cold. Meanwhile, execution livestream continuation, near the execution platform. Raymond felt his strength recover bit by bit as the fight dragged on, his divine circulation finally stabilizing as he shook off the lingering backlash of powering the Chakravya for far too long, his body responding better with each passing exchange as the discomfort that had once slowed him gradually faded away. Leo's Skyshard is not anything special. The thought came easily to him now, reinforced by experience rather than assumption. The boy is fast, and he is strong, but he is still a far cry from being a threat to me. Raymond reflected calmly, as after crossing blades with Leo multiple times already, he had developed a clear and confident understanding of the gap that separated them, the difference in refinement, endurance, and control becoming more apparent with every clash. What's funny, though, is how intensely he stares at me. Raymond noted with mild amusement, as he observed Leo's eyes never leaving him, never flickering with doubt or hesitation even as blood stained his clothes and exhaustion crept deeper into his movements. I must give him credit for that. Raymond smiled faintly. He probably can't kill me in a million years, and still looks at me like I'm prey. As that thought settled comfortably in his mind, Raymond tightened his grip around his blades, his killing intent thickening as Leo surged forward once more, daggers flashing as he attempted another direct engagement. Clang, clang, slash. Raymond intercepted the initial strikes effortlessly, his movements precise and economical, before twisting his wrist and drawing a clean line across Leo's shoulder, the blade biting just deep enough to draw blood as a thin red streak blossomed instantly. Drip, drip. Blood rolled down Leo's arm, slipping from his fingertips and staining the broken ground beneath them, as Raymond's smile widened slowly, satisfaction curling through his chest as he watched Leo grit his teeth and step back. I'm going to take my time with you, Skyshard. Raymond decided. I'll show the entire universe just how fragile you really are, before I end this. When Leo charged again, desperation mixed carefully into his movements, Raymond met him without urgency, blocking and parrying with ease before slicing into his hamstring with deliberate cruelty, the strike landing cleanly as Leo stumbled backward, balance faltering. Splat. Hobble. Hobble. Leo retreated unevenly, blood trailing behind him, while Raymond remained rooted and composed, his posture relaxed, his confidence now absolute, as he failed to realize that he was being slowly lured into a deliberate trap by Leo. Clang. Clang. Leo adjusted his rhythm, tricking Raymond to settle into a predictable tempo, as he allowed injuries to accumulate just enough to sell weakness without collapsing outright, as every stagger, every labored breath, every delayed reaction subtly reinforced the story Raymond already wanted to believe, as the demigod began to grin ear to ear the longer the battle dragged. That's it, you bastard. Leo thought grimly, even as another shallow cut opened along his ribs. Grow even more confident. Even more cocky. Hell, start fighting with your eyes closed. He prayed, as minutes passed in brutal exchange, wounds layering over wounds as Leo's body became increasingly battered, while Raymond's grin stretched wider and wider, arrogance blooming fully as he mistook restraint for incapacity. Do you see it now? Raymond declared loudly, spreading his arms as if presenting a lesson to the watching universe. The inevitable disparity between our power. He laughed. You are nothing but a mortal, cousin. His divine aura flared proudly. While I am a demigod. And in that exact moment, with Raymond's arms wide and his attention turned outward rather than inward, Leo felt something click into place. This is it. The certainty arrived with terrifying calm. I can do it now, he thought, as he drew deeply into the life essence reservoirs etched into his flesh, the ancient tattoos burning painfully as they emptied themselves all at once, their contents flooding his circuits with volatile force as he invoked the 15th forbidden move of the cult. Temporal shift. Step. Vanish. The instant Leo moved, the world broke. Space folded inward violently around him, distance compressing into something meaningless as his body was hurled forward at a speed approaching half that of light, reality itself bending to accommodate emotion it was never meant to witness, the battlefield smearing into incomprehensible streaks of color and pressure. Every nerve in Leo's body screamed. Bones vibrated violently, muscles tearing microscopically under the strain as inertia tried desperately to rip him apart, life essence burning like acid through his circuits as it struggled to stabilize a movement that demanded divine refinement. Burst. Blood burst from his mouth as his organs lagged half a fraction behind his frame. Yet he did not stop. Before Raymond's eyes could even widen, before his instincts could fully register the distortion racing toward him, Leo chained the movement seamlessly, forcing his battered body into one final command. Crownfall. His blade descended in a motion so clean and unadorned that it carried no wasted curve or flourish, cutting forward in a perfectly straight, absolute line that sliced through space, time, and resistance. As though none of them truly existed. Raymond saw it. For a single, horrifying instant, comprehension dawned in his eyes, as instinct finally caught up to reality. But with his arms still spread wide and his confidence having dulled his readiness for such a sudden escalation in speed, his reaction arrived a fraction too late. And in a battle like this, that fraction was everything. Splat. Leo's blade passed cleanly through Raymond's neck, severing flesh, bone, and divine circuitry in one flawless motion, the demigod's head lifting from his shoulders as if gently placed upon the air before tumbling end over end. FSHHHHH. Blood exploded outward in a crimson arc, spraying across the execution platform as Raymond's body stood frozen for a heartbeat longer, divine essence spilling uselessly from a corpse that no longer knew how to command it. Then it collapsed. Leo landed hard on the other side, knees buckling as he skidded across shattered stone, coughing violently as blood poured freely from his mouth, his vision swimming as the backlash of temporal shift ravaged his already exhausted body. Drip, drip. Yet even as pain tore through him, even as his muscles trembled and his bones felt dangerously close to fracturing, Leo smiled. A wide, genuine smile. Because Raymond was dead. Because the impossible had been done. And because no amount of pain, no backlash, no future consequence could ever outweigh the satisfaction of knowing that his blade had ended the monster who took Charles from him. As he simply smiled and said, "This one was for you, smoking man." Chapter 971 Bitter End. Meanwhile, Raymond's POV. Is this a bad dream? Raymond's decapitated head wondered, as even though it had been severed from his body, consciousness still clung to him for a few fleeting moments, stubbornly refusing to accept what his senses were trying to tell him as the world tilted strangely and the sky felt far too close. Something was wrong. There was no weight, no body, no breath moving through his lungs. And yet, vision and thought persisted. What's going on? He wondered, as sound arrived in fragments, distorted and distant, as if the battlefield had been pushed far away from him, muffled beneath layers of cotton and blood, while the ground rushed up toward him far too slowly. How did he even move that fast? The thought came next, sharp and panicked, cutting through the fog as memory replayed itself in broken flashes. Leo's step forward, space folding unnaturally, the sensation of pressure screaming through the air before Raymond's instincts could even finish screaming danger. What inhuman technique was that? He wondered, as confusion curdled into disbelief as he tried to piece together the moment again, replaying it from every angle he could remember, searching desperately for the mistake that had to be there. That speed wasn't mortal. His eyes shifted, vision swimming as his head rolled slightly against broken stone, as through the blur, he saw him. Leo Skyshard. Still standing, still breathing, still smiling. Leo's body was in ruins, blood soaking through his clothes, running freely from his mouth and wounds that should have dropped any other man long ago, yet his posture remained upright, his gaze calm and steady as he looked down at Raymond, not with hatred or rage, but rather with the quiet certainty of someone who had already won. No. Raymond's thoughts spiraled violently as the reality began to settle. How could I ever be defeated by a mere mortal? The question echoed uselessly inside his fading mind, pride screaming louder than pain, as rage ignited in his chest, hot and suffocating, pushing back against the creeping darkness. "Don't you dare look down on me, mortal!" He tried to shout. However, instead of words, only blood spilled from his mouth, thick and bubbling, as it spilled uselessly onto the stone, as his jaw trembled and his vision blurred further, his anger finding no outlet as his body refused to obey him one final time. Splat! Indiscernible gurgle. Seconds passed, and slowly the rage faltered, the heat draining away, as something colder took its place. Fear. This has to be some sort of mistake. The thought came weakly now, no longer sharp, no longer commanding. I cannot die here. His surroundings dimmed as though someone were slowly turning down the light on the world, the edges of his vision darkening first as shadows closed in from all sides and sensation began to slip away piece by piece. I cannot die yet. Panic surged anew, raw and desperate. Father. The name tore through his mind like a lifeline. Someone call my father. He searched wildly, his eyes straining, scanning for any sign of Caliph, for any presence that might intervene, might deny this ending or might pull him back from the edge he was sliding toward far too quickly. However, much to his horror there was no one. No familiar aura. No answering presence. Just Leo. And silence. The battlefield felt impossibly distant now, as though it belonged to another world entirely, the realization settling with crushing weight that this was not a mistake, nor a dream waiting to end, but rather something real. I had so much left to do. The thought drifted through him, slower now, heavy with regret rather than anger. So much left to achieve. Memories surfaced unbidden, ambitions, expectations, futures he had assumed were guaranteed simply by virtue of who he was, images of power not yet claimed, heights not yet reached. I hadn't even become a god yet. The irony stung sharply, bitter and final. And now, the thought never finished. His awareness fractured, consciousness slipping through his fingers. Like sand, as his eyelids grew unbearably heavy, each blink lasting longer than the last. Darkness. The world narrowed to a tunnel, and at its center stood Leo Skyshard. Bloodied, broken, and smiling. That image burned itself into Raymond's fading mind. Leo Skyshard, you bastard. The resentment lingered even as everything else began to fall away. My father will avenge me. The thought echoed faintly, more hope than conviction now, as the darkness finally swallowed what remained of him, his eyes closing forever, as his consciousness dissolved into nothingness. My father will make you pay for this. He prayed, as the last thing he ever saw was the mortal who had ended him standing tall in victory, after which there was nothing at all. Meanwhile Leo had no strength left in him to even walk properly, as after killing Raymond his body finally turned against him in full, the accumulated backlash crashing down all at once as muscles seized, nerves burned, and every breath felt like it was being dragged through shattered glass. Spasm. Tremble. His legs buckled repeatedly beneath him, thighs locking and unlocking in painful jerks as torn muscle fibers screamed in protest, while his core felt hollowed out, as though something vital had been scooped from inside his chest and never put back. Choke. Cough. Blood kept spilling from his mouth in wet, choking coughs, each one sending fresh pain through his ribs as fractured bones shifted with every movement. Hack. Cough. His vision swam, dark spots blooming at the edges as the ground tilted dangerously beneath his feet, as for the first time since the battle began, Leo felt gravity winning, his body leaning forward uncontrollably as his knees began to give wobble, tilt. However, just before he could fall, something solid moved beneath him, a broad, powerful back catching his weight, as he somehow managed to stay upright. It's time to run, Lord Father, Dumpy said, his human-sized frog form braced firmly beneath Leo as he lifted him with surprising gentleness. Everyone else has boarded the ships already, we need to go fast now, and you need to open the portal to lead us out. He reminded, as Leo chuckled and retrieved a health recovery potion from his storage ring, before starting to chug it like it were water, understanding full well that this war wasn't over till they were out of here. Chapter 972, A Changing World Order. Execution Livestream Continuation, Leo's POV. For a few fleeting moments, Leo managed to rest atop Dumpy's back while downing health recovery potions, as he quietly assessed the condition of his body and concluded that there was no way in hell that he could endure a trip from the pit back to Ixtal in his current state. There's no way I can hold open a fourth-dimensional portal for 15 minutes in this condition. If I go that route, I won't just kill myself. I'll kill everyone following me too. The realization settled heavily as Leo grit his teeth and forced himself to dig for strength in corners that did not even exist within him. I could try leading them to a different planet. One much closer to the pit. Somewhere I can rest for a few hours before taking everyone home. It was far from an optimal strategy, but Leo understood his own limits well enough to know that aiming for certain death was not bravery. It was stupidity. I can probably endure Molthorax's aura for 3 to 4 minutes. That puts 7 habitable planets within range. His thoughts sharpened as he narrowed the options. Buxer should be the best choice. Retrieving the old celestial map Moltharic had once given him, Leo studied it carefully, tracing the entry angle and exit vector between the pit and Buxer, as he calculated each margin with grim precision. Buxer shouldn't have more than a couple of monarchs guarding it right now. Even if the army's exhausted, Dumpy and the others should be able to hold the line until I recover. After that, we can promptly return to Ixtal. His jaw tightened. But leaving the pit immediately is critical. For if we don't, the entire army could be annihilated with the snap of a god's finger. He concluded. As decision made, he drew in a deep breath and disembarked from Dumpy's back, before starting his practice of slashing at precisely 61.66 degrees, his muscles spasming violently in protest as he ignored the pain and forced his body to obey even as it screamed for him to stop. Slash. THRUMM. He opened a dimensional portal barely the size of a human, the portal's edges warping reality as colors started to bleed and airflow started to distort. Crush. Thrum MMM. Crushing the last of Molthorax's orbs next, he used the burst of aura to widen the dimensional portal entrance, the gate now wide enough to let a couple ships pass side by side, as he turned and gestured for the cult army to follow him in quick. All units follow me in, and be prepared for war when we emerge on the other side. Leo instructed, as he stepped into the dimensional portal, the cult army following closely behind him, as within a minute and a half the entire cult army evacuated the pit, the dimensional portal closing in behind them, as the execution livestream covered their retreat. Before finally cutting to a recovering Terrence, who looked like he had seen a ghost as he stared at Raymond's headless corpse with a white face. Meanwhile, across the universe, panic spread across the universe as righteous faction netizens watched the cult army retreat with eyes wide in horror. No, this can't be. They actually won, a woman said while traveling in a packed transit lounge, as the fellow passengers around her, all looked at the screen with pure fear written across their faces. If they can do this, if they can just barge into righteous lands and save criminals from our justice system, then do we even have a universal order left anymore? Or is this the start of a new chaotic era? An era where only might makes right? A philosopher asked while standing in a public street, as his highly developed mind already calculated the consequences of this cult. Victory today. Did you see how Leo Skyshard killed Commander Raymond? It was almost like the commander could not even see him coming. This war has shown us something unforgettable. It's almost like the cult soldiers are much stronger than ours at the same tier, and that trend is extremely worrying. A military commander said inside a barracks mess hall, as he realized that the cult army would prove to be a nightmare to face in the future, especially since the survivors of the war on the pit would go on to train the next batch of soldiers that would be even more formidable than the last. This is it, the cult's demise stops now. With the criminal Aegon Ver successfully saved, you can bet your ass they're going to be even more rowdy the next time we see them. A political commentator posted on the Galaxy Net, as throughout the universe a sort of gloomy atmosphere took hold of all righteous citizens. However, while most citizens felt too overloaded by the righteous defeat to express any strong opinions, a select few could not contain their outrage whatsoever. With how our military commanders treated the VIP guests, I'm glad they all died, a man spat openly in a crowded forum channel, his comment exploding across feeds before moderators could react. We call the cult evil, but I saw no morality in our troops today either. He argued, as the backlash was almost immediate. What are you saying? Someone shot back angrily. Our soldiers did not kill them, the evil cult did. Another defended, as the man simply scoffed in disbelief. Really? Is that what you genuinely think? The man replied coldly. Did you not see them being denied the rite of passage while the army stood strong? No extraction, no protection, no contingency. The man pointed out, as at this point voices in his support started to flood in. I watched it 3 times. The cult charged, chaos broke out, and our forces protected their formations first. The civilians were abandoned. A woman chimed in, her voice shaking with anger. That's war, another tried to argue weakly. No, she snapped. That's selective protection. On another world, a dockworker slammed his fist against a holoscreen. So the cult risks everything to save their dragon, but our side can't even spare resources to evacuate its own dignitaries. That's because they don't see us as people, someone muttered beside him. Just assets. A scholar added bitterly, we call the cult monstrous, yet they retrieved every last soldier. We call ourselves righteous, yet we sacrificed our own when it was inconvenient. The argument spread like wildfire. Then who decides whose life matters? Is loyalty worth more than obedience? If the system won't protect its own elites, what chance do the rest of us have? Across the universe, faith in the universal order wavered. Not because the cult had won a battle, but because the righteous faction had revealed cracks in its own foundation, as for the first time, citizens began to wonder whether the order they trusted was built on justice, or merely convenience. Chapter 973 Deceiver Out. Meanwhile within the fourth dimension, Multheric and Helmuth's POV. Helmuth never expected the battle against Multheric to be the most intense experience of his life, as although there were no blades crossed and no physical wounds exchanged, he still felt as though it was the most difficult battle he had ever faced. What is wrong with this foolish dragon? Why is he trying to override my very identity by taking over my physical vessel? Does he not feel pain like I do? He wondered, as every time their souls clashed, he felt a kind of agony surge through him that was entirely unfamiliar, a pain that did not tear muscle or shatter bone, but instead attacked the very concept of self, leaving him disoriented and furious in equal measure. There was no direction within the fourth dimension, no up or down to orient himself by, as Helmuth instead felt as though he was suspended inside his own consciousness, watching Multherac's presence press inward from all sides, like an ocean rising without urgency, yet impossible to stop. What is he trying to do? At this rate we will both fall into a void gap and never be able to return to the normal universe. He thought, as the longer Multheric pressed against his soul, the more disoriented he felt within the fourth dimension, his sense of belonging beginning to blur as though something fundamental was being slowly shifted out of alignment. Fuck you, Red Dragon, your era is gone, this is my era now. He roared, as he pushed his will outward with berserker ferocity. However, much to his dismay, Multheric did not meet that resistance head on, but instead endured it, his ancient consciousness flowing around Helmuth's fury rather than breaking against it, as it seeped patiently into every gap Helmuth did not even realize existed. You rely too much on force, Multherac's voice rumbled, not spoken aloud but resonating directly within Helmuth's awareness, as it carried neither mockery nor anger, only an unsettling certainty that made Helmuth's instincts recoil in terror. You have never learned how to be still the way I have when I did not have a body for over 2,500 years. Multheric pointed out calmly, as Helmuth snarled in response, his rage flaring violently while he tried to seize control of his vessel more tightly, driving his will deep into his own soul like claws into flesh, as he attempted to assert ownership with everything he had, flooding the shared space with visions of endless slaughter, conquered worlds, and broken enemies in a desperate effort to overwhelm Multheric through sheer brutality. Yet instead of recoiling, Multheric accepted those memories, allowing them to wash over him as though they were nothing more than ripples upon a vast surface, as ancient recollections far older and heavier began to bleed back into Helmuth in return, overwhelming him with impressions of collapsed civilizations, dying stars, and ancient beast gods screaming as they were erased from existence. Helmuth staggered internally, his sense of time warping as seconds stretched and compressed unpredictably, causing him to struggle to maintain cohesion while Multherac's presence coiled tighter, as it did not attack his strength directly, but instead pressed against his identity, as it tested which parts of Helmuth were truly immutable and which were nothing more than habits forged through violence. This vessel is strong, Multheric acknowledged, his will tightening further as he began to press deeper, threading himself through Helmuth's divine circuits like molten gold poured into fractures. But strength alone does not impress a being as ancient as me. Pain flared again, sharper this time, as Helmuth felt pieces of himself momentarily blur, fragments of instinct slipping out of alignment as Multherac's consciousness brushed against his core, attempting to synchronize rather than dominate, as though he were rewriting Helmuth's soul into something that could contain him. Arghhhhhh. Helmuth roared in defiance, forcing his will outward in one last brutal surge, as he anchored himself to rage, pride, and dominance that had defined him for so long, as he refused to yield even an inch of control. And yet, beneath that fury, a cold realization crept in. Multheric was not rushing. He was not desperate. He was waiting for Helmuth to exhaust himself. Waiting for his resistance to fracture under its own intensity. Waiting for the moment when Helmuth's will burned itself hollow, and left behind an empty vessel ripe for the taking. As for the first time since becoming a god, Helmuth felt a flicker of something dangerously close to fear, as he realized this was not a battle he could win through violence alone, and that Multheric was perfectly content to let his own soul be destroyed if it meant conquering his, the ancient dragon showing no intention of retreat now that the soul takeover had truly begun. Meanwhile, back on the pit. After claiming ownership of Soren's dagger, Morris looked at all the gods present around him, as he chuckled softly and gave them a slow, unapologetically nasty look, his eyes lingering just long enough on each of their faces to savor the discomfort his presence now inspired. I don't know where Helmuth is, however, with Soren dead, I feel like there is no longer any need for us to remain in an anti-cult alliance, he said lightly, as though announcing the end of a dull meeting rather than the collapse of a universe-shaping pact. So as of today, you can all consider me an independent god. I will follow my own will from here on out. The declaration hung in the air, heavy and unsettling, as no one immediately moved to challenge him, the weight of him now possessing an origin dagger still pressing down on every thought, every breath, as Morris smiled wider at that silence, as though it were confirmation enough that he had made the right choice. Adios, fellow immortals. Deceiver out, he said before offering them a shallow, mocking bow that carried none of the respect such a gesture was meant to convey. As at that moment, without waiting for permission or retaliation, he stepped back and tore open a fourth-dimensional tunnel with practiced ease, its edges rippling violently as distorted space screamed under the force of its creation, before he slipped into it without a second glance, leaving 6 extremely conflicted gods behind to deal with the aftermath of his decision. Chapter 974 Aftermath. The Pit, Calith's POV. With Soren dead and Morris having declared his desire to become independent, Calith suddenly found himself surrounded by 5 great clan gods, who while not openly hostile, now looked at him as if they were equals rather than vassals. Eye roll. Smirk. Smiling slowly, Calith made eye contact with each and every single great clan god, as he widened his shoulders and portrayed his dominance, before slowly swinging his origin metal daggers between his fingers. Twirl. Although he said nothing, he tried to portray his dominance through his posture alone, as he waited for any of the great clan gods to dare project killing intent towards him. Nervous glances. Tired gulps. The great clan gods looked at one another, their expressions full of doubt, as they tried to gauge the will of the others. However, after a few seconds, when they still failed to arrive at a common conclusion, it was Calith that broke the deadlock. I am going to return to the Eternal Garden, where I will erect a tombstone for my fallen brother. If any of you wish to talk about the change in universal order, or Morris's apparent defection, you can approach me anytime in the coming month. He said boldly, before slinging Soren's dead body over his shoulders. As he waited for anyone to offer a retort. Silence. A few nervous seconds passed, and when nobody voiced an issue still, it was Calith who moved first, as he opened a dimensional portal out of the pit, and back towards the Eternal Garden, still unaware that on a separate part of the planet, his son Raymond had also lost his life. It was only after Calith was gone that the remaining great clan gods finally looked beyond themselves and began to assess what was happening across the rest of the planet, as they extended their perceptions outward and found the cult army already gone. The battlefield emptied with unsettling efficiency, as the only remaining life signatures they found were of Clarence, Terence and the local barbarians. Looks like the cult rats have run away yet again. Luhan scoffed quietly, shaking his head in open disgust, while the others chuckled at his words. Well, it's not like it matters even if they run anymore. Mu Shen added immediately, shrugging as though the existence of the cult no longer bothered him at all. With Soren dead, we can wipe out whatever remains in the blink of an eye. So in my opinion, the cult is officially no longer a force we need to fear. He declared, as his words were met with a quiet, unspoken agreement, as a shared understanding settled naturally amongst the great clan gods, that without Soren, the cult was no longer an existential threat, but rather a loose collection of survivors who could be hunted down at leisure and eliminated when the political climate demanded it. As although Aegon Ver escaping today was inconvenient, it wasn't outright alarming. As with Soren dead, they still believed that they had come out of this war as victors. However, while the cult army escaping did not bother them, what did was Morris walking away with an origin dagger and declaring independence, as their conversation quickly shifted towards that. Next, Morris walking away from the righteous alliance is bad, Ruvasa said at last, her voice tight as she subtly shifted her stance to hide the blood steadily pooling along her hip, divine regeneration struggling to close the origin metal wound. Not just bad, it's borderline alarming, for although Soren was hard to handle, he was still predictable, whereas Morris is just psychotic. She added, as Luhan nodded grimly, his sword tip still resting against the ground as his gaze lingered on the distant spot where Morris had vanished. The cult escaping with Ver is a mere embarrassment. However, Morris defecting immediately afterwards makes us look incompetent, he pointed out, as he tried to shine some light towards the optics of this war now that it was over. If word spreads that Morris no longer believes in the existing universal order, then the illusion of control we've maintained for millennia cracks overnight. Dutrask added next, as it was that exact implication which weighed heaviest on every great clan god present, the issue none of them could afford to ignore, the issue of optics. For they understood all too well that universal authority was never upheld through raw strength alone, but through perception, and that in the silent war to maintain a favorable image, they had failed spectacularly today. Aegon Ver escaping the pit alive was already a public humiliation, a visible stain that would invite whispers and doubt across the universe, yet that damage was still manageable, as Soren's death provided a counterweight strong enough to stabilize the narrative. However, Morris declaring independence immediately afterward threatened to drive that perception blade far deeper, as his defection transformed a contained embarrassment into a systemic fracture, one that demanded their attention before it metastasized into something they could no longer control. What do we do now? Yukiro asked at this moment, as his question made everyone take in a collective breath. Sigh. For a moment, no one answered. Then Mu Shen stepped forward. This is our chance, he said, voice low and insistent, as though afraid the others might not agree with his sense of urgency. Soren is gone. Morris has cut himself loose and Kalith is injured. He paused, allowing the implication to settle. If the five of us act together, right now, we could overthrow Kalith and Helmuth entirely. No more overlords. No more hierarchy. We take control for ourselves. The idea was dangerous, tempting. For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to shift as the possibility crystallized, a future where the eternal garden no longer dictated order, and where the great clan gods ruled openly and absolutely. However, just as he proposed this idea, it was Ruvasa who laughed in dismissal first. She gestured down at herself, at the blood staining her robes and the tremor lingering in her stance as divine exhaustion refused to fade. Look at us, she said simply. This battle already cost us more than it gave. Dutrask raised his ruined arm in agreement, jaw tightening as pain flared again. I won't rush into another war half broken, he added flatly. Not against Kalith, nor against Helmuth, and for sure not against Morris. Silence followed, heavy and contemplative, as the ambition Mu Shen had voiced slowly lost momentum, worn down by reality rather than rebuttal. At last, Ruvasa straightened, forcing herself upright despite the pain. Let us wait, she said firmly. Let Helmuth return. Let the aftermath settle. Let the universe forget the noise before we make another move. Her gaze hardened. For now, Soren is dead, and that alone is a victory. The others nodded one by one, the consensus forming not through excitement, but through exhaustion and caution, as survival instinct overrode ambition. All except Mu Shen, as he remained silent with his gaze fixed on the empty stretch of space where Morris had vanished, unease gnawing steadily at him while his instincts refused to settle, warning him that what they had just witnessed was not an ending at all, but the quiet beginning of something far more dangerous that was carefully disguised as closure. Still, with no support forthcoming, even he was forced to relent for now. Swoosh. Soon, without ceremony or further words, the great clan gods began to disperse, each opening their own pathways back to their respective clans, as they abandoned the pit, as swiftly as they had arrived, leaving behind nothing but broken stone, fading divine residue, and the quiet certainty that the universe had shifted in ways none of them yet fully understood. Chapter 975 Arriving on Buxar. Planet Buxar, near a righteous faction military base. The atmosphere on Buxar was tense as planetary feeds continued looping fragmented footage and half-confirmed reports about the successful extraction of the cult dragon Aegon Ver, commentators arguing in cautious tones while citizens watched with expressions that hovered somewhere between awe and dread. "They actually pulled him out," one soldier muttered, resting his sword against the perimeter railing as he stared at the holoscreen flickering above the base courtyard. "Yeah," the man beside him replied quietly. "And did you notice something else?" The first soldier glanced sideways. "What?" "None of the righteous elite units that were called to provide security to this event survived this war," he pointed out, as his statement caused his colleague to pause. The hum of engines, distant chatter and the rhythmic march of patrol in the background, all of it seemed to dull for the first soldier as the implication of his colleague's words settled. "They called up the best," the second continued, lowering his voice instinctively. "Top-ranked strike teams. Commander escorts. Hell, even veteran commanders themselves. And still," gulp, he swallowed, "not a single one of them returned," he said, as the first soldier felt a chill creep up his spine. "Shiver. You think they all," he began, "Doesn't matter what I think," the second cut in. "The fact of the matter is that the cult army went in, took their target, and walked out. Whatever happened at the pit was definitely outside the scope of righteous calculations." The first soldier exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around his sword. "I used to be pissed I wasn't good enough to get deployed there." A humorless smile tugged at his lips. "Now, I'm glad." The other nodded. "Same. Whatever monsters were fighting down there, I don't think rank mattered." The duo discussed, as suddenly at that moment, the sky rippled. FWOOOSH. At first, it was subtle, like heat distortion without heat, before space itself folded inward, alarms screaming far too late as a fourth-dimensional portal tore open above the central landing zone. Beezeet. Alarms blaring. Conversation died instantly, as Leo Skyshard emerged from the rift first, followed closely behind by massive-sized destroyer and carrier ships. Aura unfold. Choke. What the hell? The first soldier began, but before he could even complete his sentence, Leo's crushing aura choked him, as he alongside hundreds of thousands of other soldiers present at the military base died within seconds of coming into contact with Leo's pressure, as the cult army rolled into Buxar unopposed. Meanwhile Leo felt it the moment his feet touched solid ground, as the crushing momentum that had carried him across dimensions finally vanished, leaving behind only exhaustion so deep it bordered on hollowness, as though something essential had been scooped out of his chest and never returned. Falter. His aura receded almost on instinct, not because he willed it to, but because there was simply nothing left to sustain it, as the backlash from temporal shift, the forced evacuation, and the prolonged combat all collapsed inward at once, hitting him in a delayed, merciless wave. Stagger. Breath hitch. Every step forward felt heavier than the last as Leo pushed himself through the ruined entryway of Buxar's military base, his vision dimming at the edges while his heartbeat thundered too loud in his ears, as if his body was struggling to remember how to keep itself upright without constant command. Too many problems pressed at the edges of his mind. Calith, Soren, Helmuth, Multheric, survival. And each of them tried to surface all at once, clawing for attention and demanding resolution, as the weight of everything he had set in motion threatened to crush him beneath its sheer scale. Not now, Leo thought, as he forced them down. The cult army was safe. Ver had been rescued, and hence, for now at least, he had done all that he could do. From here, my capable men can handle the rest. The thought brought a faint smile to his blood-stained lips, as his legs finally gave out a heartbeat later. Knee. Crack. Leo dropped to one knee inside the fractured plaza, stone splintering beneath the impact as his strength vanished completely, his hands failing to catch him as his body tipped forward, consciousness slipping through his grasp before he even hit the ground. Thud. He did not feel the floor. He did not feel the cold. He simply fell, mind going dark as his body shut down entirely, trusting without hesitation that he would wake up later. And just as he expected, the cult moved. Within minutes of Leo's collapse, the sky above Buxar filled with Shadows as cult destroyers fanned outward in precise formations, engines roaring as they tore across the atmosphere, descending on military installations with overwhelming force. One base fell, then another, then another. Righteous defenses buckled almost immediately, command structures collapsing under the speed and coordination of the assault, as Commander Anderson Silva took point from orbit, issuing orders with ruthless efficiency, while Mickey James led ground engagements personally, cutting through local commanders and elite defenders before they could even understand what exactly was going on. The cult did not rush. They did not panic. They expanded methodically, carving out a secure planetary perimeter around Buxer, as they isolated it, fortified it, and turned the surrounding regions into a dead zone where no righteous reinforcements could gather unchecked, orbital patrols locking down approach vectors while ground forces dismantled command nodes with surgical precision. By the time the alarms stopped screaming and the last organized resistance was silenced, a safe space had been established, layered with contingencies and overlapping defenses designed to endure prolonged siege. And at its center, Leo lay unconscious, protected, as the doctors worked on him restlessly for the second time in the same day, knowing full well that the fate of the cult now hinged on how quickly their lord could stand again. XXXXXX. End of Volume 9. A New Era of Chaos. Hope to see you all in Volume 10, titled The Cult's Resurgence. Chapter 976 Reunited. Timeless Assassin Volume 10, The Cult's Resurgence. Democracy. My cult will never be a democracy, for there is no greater evil than a society ruled by all. When authority is granted to everyone, responsibility belongs to no one, and judgment collapses into noise. No one would entrust a ship to the loudest voice on the deck, nor would they place a sword in the hands of one who does not know how to wield it. Skill is required where consequence exists, and wisdom is demanded where lives are at stake. Yet when it comes to governing a state, many insist that judgment requires no education, no discipline, no understanding. They claim that all opinions are equal, even when knowledge is not, which is not justice but negligence disguised as fairness. When the uninformed are granted the same authority as the learned, truth becomes a matter of numbers rather than reason. The crowd does not seek what is right, only what is pleasing, and what is loudest soon replaces what is wisest. Thus, when rule is surrendered to the masses, chaos wears the mask of freedom, and as reason is drowned by noise, society does not become equal, it becomes ungovernable. The Timeless Assassin. Upon abolishing the rule of the masses, and founding the First Elders' Council, a body chosen by his will alone. Present day, a dreamscape, Soren's POV. The next time Soren opened his eyes after shutting them close on the pit, he found himself in the most soothing place he had ever visited, as he saw nothing but lush green grass and tall apple trees for as far as the eye could see in his vicinity. My body, it doesn't ache anymore. The thought surfaced instinctively, as after having grown accustomed to constant pain for over 2,000 years, the absence of it felt strange, even as relief quietly settled in. Is this what death is supposed to feel like? Because if yes, I surely did miss out a lot by clinging to life for so long. He thought, as he laughed a short mirthless chuckle, until his eyes landed on a long-haired, broad-shouldered man sitting calmly underneath one of the apple trees. Huh, when did father even come? I'm sure he wasn't there a split second ago. Soren thought, as tears started to stream down his face against his will. Over 2 millennia have passed, but I still don't understand the secret behind your version of the Second's Walk. Soren thought, as he grinned ear to ear looking at his old man, the Timeless Assassin. You haven't changed a bit. He muttered softly, as the old man looked exactly as Soren remembered him, seated casually beneath the apple tree with a relaxed posture and peaceful expression, his face carrying the same gentle smile and kind eyes that had once made the world feel simple. As somehow, that smile alone was enough to make Soren feel small. Again, as looking into those familiar eyes stripped him of every title and all his power, reducing him to the child he had been before everything went wrong. A child who had never wanted the life that followed his father's death. It's been a while, hasn't it, son? The Timeless Assassin spoke softly, his voice warm and familiar, as if no centuries had passed at all. As Soren nodded weakly in response, the cult master's throat tightening as the tears refused to stop. It has. Father, he said, his voice uneven. Life for me was long and hard in your absence. He shared, as the timeless assassin let out a quiet chuckle, nodding slowly as though this answer had never been in doubt. I can imagine, he said. The Soren I knew would not have cried even if his enemies were tearing him apart limb by limb. There was no mockery in his words, only fondness, his smile widening slightly as he gestured beside him. Come, he said gently. Sit with me. Share an apple with your old man. Tell me what became of your life, and tell me whether you carried any regrets with you to the end. The timeless assassin invited, as Soren moved on unsteady legs, lowering himself beside his father before folding in on himself, his head dropping as he pressed his face between his knees, the weight of centuries finally finding a place to rest. To be honest, father, he said quietly, I had many regrets until the very last day I lived. He paused, drawing in a slow breath. But now that I'm dead, I can see that most of them were chains I wrapped around myself, not truths I was ever truly bound by. As looking back, I feel like I became a prisoner to my own emotions. More than to any circumstances. His hands clenched against the grass. All I had to do to live differently was let go of my anger towards Caliph for betraying you, and I probably would not have carried that bitterness for over 2 millennia. His voice softened, almost breaking. But somehow, I couldn't. Silence lingered between them as Soren lifted his head slightly. Even now, he said, barely above a whisper, 2 millennia later, you are still the most important man I ever had in my life, and I curse Caliph every day for taking you away from me. He shared as the timeless assassin chuckled, his expression one of pure joy as he patted Soren's head as if he were a small child rather than a mature adult. You know, boy, at the start, I feel like I did honestly love you and Caliph the same. However, as the years passed and your idolism of me became more and more evident, I could not help but dote on you just a little more, because you reminded me of a young me, and that just made me like you just a little bit more than your brother. Which, inevitably, is what made him turn on me at the end. Looking back, maybe my favoritism of you killed him internally a million times before he finally lifted the dagger against me. So in a way, maybe I deserved what was coming my way. The timeless assassin shared, as Soren stayed silent listening to his father's reflection on what perhaps could have been the catalyst for Caliph's betrayal at the end. Chapter 977 The Desire That Never Fades. The Dreamscape, Soren's POV. For a while, Soren sat in silence, as he considered what the timeless assassin had told him from a neutral perspective, yet no matter how hard he tried to justify it, he could find no reason to excuse Caliph's actions. I still can't accept him betraying you, father, even if you perhaps loved him a little less than me. For in the end, if he betrayed you just because you showed him a little less favor, then not only is he mentally ill, but he is probably the most vain individual I've ever met. For there is only one immutable rule in my life, which is to never betray blood. And he broke that just because he did not get enough attention, which is something I can never forgive or excuse, no matter the reason behind it. Soren shared, as the timeless assassin nodded in agreement to his words, as though appreciating his perspective on it. However, while he did appreciate the perspective, he did not necessarily accept its argument in its entirety, as he smiled and took a bite out of the apple in his hand. Crunch. You know, he began, his voice slightly gruff as he spoke with a mouthful of food. Destiny works in weird ways. Not all humans are born equal, and not all humans live by the same values as others, which is why, what seems inconsequential to you might be incompromisable for someone else. While what may seem vain to them might be important to you. Maybe, if I showed Caliph more favor than you, and you had lived his life, maybe you still would not have chosen to betray me, because you are just wired that way. However, destiny must have decided otherwise. For what happened was that I ended up favoring the son that did not care about such stuff more. And hence, it led to the chain of events the way that it did. The loop of history is a hard fate to escape. And in the end, I tried but failed spectacularly in breaking the cycle of inevitability. The timeless assassin shared, as he spoke rather casually, as if his failure to break the cycle did not bother him in the slightest now that he was dead. If I could have given you just one piece of advice before I died, it would have been to live for yourself and no one else. For I tried to live to change the universe in my later years, and perhaps, that is what I regret the most after my death. The timeless assassin shared, as he looked at the sky above the dreamscape with a sad melancholy in his eyes. Forget it. You're here beside me after so many years, come spar with me and show me how much you have progressed as a warrior. Also, tell me about the cult and the final events that led to your death while we are at it. The timeless assassin requested, as he stood up and assumed a fighting stance, only for Soren to chuckle and do the same an instant later. Let me warn you, father. I'm not the same warrior you faced while you were still alive. I have perfected my own version of the Second's Walk, and I might be able to actually win a few rounds against you now. Soren boasted, as the timeless assassin let out a hearty chuckle, as if this was exactly the day he had been waiting for a long time. Talk is cheap, son. Whatever you want to say it with your blade. The timeless assassin said, as the two faced off with nothing but the widest grin on their faces, as at the end of it all, everything else faded, but their desire to be the best warrior they could never did. Meanwhile, somewhere inside the fourth dimension, Multharak's POV. Pant. Multharak panted heavily within Helmuth's body as the final resistance collapsed. The last fragments of the former berserker gods will ground down beneath sheer endurance and malice, until the latent soul anchoring the vessel was erased from existence. Shudder. The body convulsed violently as reality settled into place before finally going still, as Multharak's laughter spilled out in unrestrained delight. Ha 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 ha. It began low and ragged, torn from a throat that had endured endless agony, before deepening into a heavy rumble that filled the space around him, as he straightened within the stolen flesh and flexed fingers that now answered to him alone. Finally, a physical form. He muttered as he inhaled deeply and greedily, savoring the sensation of air flooding his lungs for the first time in over 3 millennia. Finally, lungs that contract and expand. He shouted, as within the depths of the soul vessel he felt the final traces of Helmuth fade, the former berserker god's presence unraveling into distant echoes until nothing of consequence remained. Crack. Pop. Multharak rolled his shoulders, feeling the immense frame respond as ancient draconic essence surged through the body, reshaping it from within and asserting dominance over flesh that had once housed a god, as he traced faint lines across his skin and the air recoiled around him. So this is what it feels like to be truly alive, Multharak murmured, his voice rough and layered, as he savored how it was no longer confined to thought or projection, but carried fully through a physical form. Smile. His lips curled into a slow grin, as he lifted his gaze and sensed the thinning boundary between realms, the veil separating this vessel from the three-dimensional world weakening beneath his presence, as exhilaration spread through him. A successful takeover of Helmuth's body meant that he could finally return to the wider universe as a physical presence. Not just as a forgotten legend, but as the terror of galaxies, as he could start his life anew, and bend the universe to his will once more. Universe beware. Multharak is coming. Chapter 978 Morning. 1 week later, the Eternal Garden, Calith's POV. Calith stood at the edge of the Eternal Garden's highest cliff with his arms crossed behind his back, as the endless sea below breathed in slow, harmonious rhythms, its waves rising to kiss the stone before shattering into mist that drifted upward and settled gently against his robes, soaking him in fine droplets he did not bother to shield himself from. Crash. Splash. The Eternal Garden was beautiful today. Almost painfully so, as sunlight filtered through the vast green canopies overhead, refracting into soft, layered hues while the air hummed with a quiet serenity only a place this divine could sustain, and yet, standing there at its edge, Calith felt none of it. His gaze rested instead on the 2 gravestones set slightly apart from one another, carved from the same eternal stone yet burdened with entirely different weights, as one bore the name of his brother and eternal adversary, Soren, while the other carried a name that still refused to feel real no matter how many times he read it. Raymond. Crash. Splash. The sea roared softly below, as Calith's jaw tightened, his expression unmoving while something old and heavy twisted slowly in his chest, because this war had not merely cost him armies or influence, but blood, legacy, and certainty, stripping away pieces of his life one by one until only silence remained. Throb. A dull ache pulsed across his face. The scar left by Soren's origin blade stretched from his forehead down across his cheek, slicing through one eye in a cruel diagonal, as although the bleeding had stopped and the flesh had healed, the pain seemed to live there permanently now as though giving him a persistent reminder of the battle that had happened. Good luck living, brother. Soren's last words played in his mind, as he finally understood the true meaning behind it. How did you live with your injuries for over 2 millennia? Caliph wondered, as he recalled how that morning, when he had first awakened, there had been a brief, terrifying moment where the eye had shown him nothing at all. No light, no color, no form, only void. And although divine regeneration had corrected it seconds later, vision rushing back as if nothing had ever gone wrong, Caliph knew better, as the origin poison had already begun its work, subtle and patient, lodged deep within tissues that would never fully purge themselves. Over centuries, that eye would weaken. Over millennia, it would fail. Blindness was not imminent, but it was inevitable. And Soren had known that when he struck him. Sigh. Caliph exhaled slowly, the mist clinging to his lashes as he stared at the gravestones once more, his thoughts heavy and unspoken, because in the end, victory had not come without cost, and this time, the universe had demanded payment in blood he could never reclaim. I may have hated my father, I may have hated my brother, but I never hated you. You, and your children, are the only people I still consider to be family in this universe. Caliph thought as he stared at Raymond's tombstone with rage boiling in his heart. At the time, when he left the pit, even the possibility of Raymond dying had never entered his mind. As with Soren dead, he simply did not believe that any other warrior even had the means to hurt his son. However, he was proven wrong, as Raymond was apparently taken down by a mere monarch. Leo Skyshard, Caliph thought, as the mist clinging to the cliffside trembled subtly while his fingers curled into his palms, nails biting into flesh under the mounting weight of that realization, because a monarch killing a demigod was not merely improbable, but a direct affront to the hierarchy that governed existence itself. Leo Skyshard. The name echoed again, darker this time. The man my brother entrusted the cult to. The irony was bitter enough to taste. As Caliph's expression twisted, rage flooding through him in a sudden, violent surge, his divine aura slipped free without restraint, spilling outward in jagged waves that tore through the eternal garden's tranquility. As wind screamed across the cliffs and the sea below responded instinctively, its once calm surface heaving as massive swells collided violently against the stone. Roar. Crash. The air itself trembled. Trees bent. Mist was torn apart and scattered like smoke. As for a few heartbeats, the eternal garden looked as though it might shatter under the weight of his fury, as Caliph stood unmoving at its center, eyes burning with a wrath that had nowhere left to go. Then, slowly, deliberately, he drew it back. Breath by breath, the pressure receded, the wind softened, and the sea below returned to its steady rhythm, as Caliph forced his emotions down into something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Control. Silence reclaimed the cliff. Only then did Caliph speak, his voice low, steady, and utterly devoid of mercy as he stared out toward the horizon, toward a future that had just gained a single, unmistakable target. For the crime of taking my son away from me, he said quietly, each word carved with absolute intent. Your death won't be a simple one. He swore, as he started to plot his attack on Leo Skyshard and his entire bloodline, which he swore to kill in the most merciless form possible. I will mourn my son's death for exactly 83 more days, Caliph said softly, the number spoken with unsettling precision as his gaze remained fixed on the gravestone. 83 days to bury grief where it belongs, to let rage cool into clarity, and to decide how the universe will remember what was taken from me. His jaw tightened. After which, he continued, voice dropping into something sharp and absolute, there will be no restraint, no mercy, and no distinction between enemy and collateral. A breath passed. Leo Skyshard and the cult will learn what it means to be noticed by a God who has nothing left to lose. Chapter 979 The Consequences of Helmuth's Absence. Meanwhile on planet Granada, Morris's POV. Kaboom. Rain. Laughter. Morris chuckled like a maniac, as he received the most interesting report he had seen in quite a long time. A report on the whereabouts and recent activity of the berserker god Helmuth, who apparently hadn't been acting like himself as of late. Report title: The Unusual Behavior of the Berserker God. My lord, this is to inform you that recent sightings of Helmuth the Berserker indicate severe deviations from his established psychological and combat profile. Contrary to expectations, Lord Helmuth has not returned to the pit, nor has he responded to any recall attempts issued by the righteous faction, and has instead been repeatedly sighted across multiple beast planets, with a particular focus on worlds under dragon dominion. Morris's grin widened slowly, rain sliding harmlessly off his shoulders as he continued to read the report. Witness accounts confirm that during these appearances, Helmuth has openly identified himself as Multheric, while taking up the title, the Terror of Galaxies, which is a designation that is entirely inconsistent with his historical behavioral patterns. The report noted, as a low, delighted chuckle slipped from Morris's lips. Further anomalies have been recorded in his combat methodology, as the subject has abandoned his signature axe-based berserker style, and has instead been spotted favoring large-scale spellcasting, spatial distortion techniques, and sustained magical assaults previously uncharacteristic of his known skill set. The report continued, as Morris tilted his head slightly, his mischievous eyes gleaming as lightning illuminated the ocean below. Physical alterations have also been observed. Lord Helmuth's skin now displays pulsing red veins beneath the surface, while his eye color has been reported to change from gray-black to gold, while his hair has transitioned from brown to crimson red. Analysts currently speculate that the subject may have suffered catastrophic cognitive damage, identity collapse, or invasive soul overwrite. However, there is no conclusive evidence to support either theory just yet. The report concluded, as Morris covered his eyes in delight. By the heavens! Helmuth has lost his body to the old dragon. Ha 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 ha. Morris inferred from the report, as although the underlings were unsure whether or not a soul override had actually taken place, Morris, with his many millennia of experience, instantly understood what could have gone down. Interesting, he muttered, his voice thick with amusement as realization finally snapped into place. So that's why Soren pushed him into the fourth dimension when he did. His laughter softened, sharpening into something far more dangerous as understanding finally clicked into place, his grin widening while he slowly shook his head. Your movements finally make sense to me now, Cult Master, he murmured, voice thick with appreciation. Well played, very well played indeed. He tilted his head slightly, rain bending away from his body as though repelled by his excitement. You knew you weren't walking out of the pit alive, he continued, amusement curling deeper into his tone, so instead, you chose to leave something behind. His eyes gleamed. A new pillar to protect the cult, another ancient monster unleashed upon the universe. He muttered, as the realization sent a low, rumbling sensation through his chest. Kaboom! Thunder split the sky, briefly illuminating the delighted, almost feverish grin etched across his face. This means Multheric the dragon god is back, Morris whispered reverently, savoring every syllable. While Helmuth is dead, he let the words settle, drawing in a sharp breath as goosebumps rippled violently across his skin, pure ecstasy coursing through him as though the universe itself had just whispered its darkest promise. This, he breathed, voice trembling with anticipation, is the perfect formula for chaos. His laughter surged again, wild and unrestrained, echoing across Granada as lightning clawed across the heavens. With Multheric loose, he murmured, eyes fluttering shut as exhilaration overtook him, the balance of universal power is about to shift yet again. He trembled. Fun times. A slow, blissful smile split his face. These are such fun times. His grin widened further. I hope they last forever. Meanwhile, Su Tang's POV, Planet Su Prime. Su Tang stood at the edge of his private balcony, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out over the sprawling cityscape of Su Prime. For a long moment, he said nothing, letting the silence stretch as his thoughts aligned, before finally muttering to himself when the time felt right. Surprisingly, after everything we did to harm the righteous faction, the universe does not even seem to notice it, as it seems to be swept beneath the chaos the cult stirred during the execution livestream. The realization pleased him more than he cared to admit, as the outcome had exceeded even his most optimistic projections, because while attention had been monopolized by gods clashing and righteous elites collapsing, the subtle movements of lesser powers had slipped neatly beneath notice. That is, better than I had hoped. A faint grin formed on his face, as this scenario was far cleaner than any outcome he had dared plan for, as it allowed the Su clan to move freely beneath the shadow of far greater events. Caliph will not take Raymond's death lying down. He muttered as his expression grew more serious as he traced the inevitable arc of vengeance in his mind, fully aware that a god did not lose his son without answering in blood, and that retaliation was not a Question of if, but when. Which means the Sioux clan will not become the immediate target of his wrath. That certainty brought with it a measure of relief, because Caliph's fury would have direction, and for now, that direction was not pointed toward Sioux Prime. Still, his fingers tightened slightly as another name surfaced. Leo Skyshard killing Raymond was unexpected, and frankly, foolish. He analyzed, as although he did not think that the feat itself was something to take lightly, since a monarch killing a demigod was definitely most impressive. However, he still believed it to be stupid, because he understood that Caliph's rage would now be drawn inevitably toward the cult, placing them squarely beneath the gaze of a god with nothing but vengeance on his mind. For the foreseeable future, the cult will remain in Caliph's crosshairs, he thought, as he analyzed how this situation, while dangerous for the cult, was beneficial for the Sioux clan. However, what truly interests me is Helmuth. The berserker god's absence weighed heavily on his thoughts, as silence from a being like Helmuth was never accidental. He vanished from the pit, and has yet to return to his domain. That absence was unnatural, and far more unsettling than open hostility. What does that mean? The question lingered, unanswered, as Su Tang considered what such a disappearance could herald. And more importantly, what does it mean for us? As patriarch of the Sioux clan, Su Tang knew his role was not to react, but to anticipate, to guide his people through storms before the first thunder ever reached them. Troubled times were coming, and as he stood there overlooking his city, his mind already began mapping contingencies and future alignments, so that the Sioux clan would not merely survive the troubled times, but rather profit from it. Chapter 980 The Future of the Cult. 8 days after the end of the execution livestream, Planet Ixtal, Leo's POV. It was 2 days into the cult's occupation of Buxar that Leo finally regained consciousness, and after assessing the situation, he ordered an immediate withdrawal and a risky 5-day journey through open space, as he commanded the army to return to Ixtal, fearing encirclement by righteous forces if he stayed on Buxar for too long. Thankfully, the return passed without incident, yet despite surviving the journey intact, Leo's body failed to recover alongside it, leaving him confined to bed, while being wrapped in layers of bandages and healing arrays that did little to restore his strength. Is the temperature fine, honey? Amanda asked softly as she blew on a spoonful of soup before bringing it to Leo's lips, as Leo gulped it in without complaints. It's perfect, darling. Leo replied with a faint smile, warmth flickering briefly across his tired expression, before his gaze drifted toward the far corner of the room, where Chaosbringer sat quietly with a thick stack of documents resting across his lap. My lord, he said. If you are ready, I will begin the report. He offered, as Leo took another slow sip of soup, before nodding. The first matter concerns the rescued dragon, Aegon Ver, Chaosbringer began. There are circulating allegations that he may have leaked sensitive cult information to the righteous faction during his capture. And the execution livestream video of Raymond using shapeshift doesn't really help his case, as many within the cult now want immediate clarification regarding this situation. Chaosbringer explained, as Leo's expression instantly tightened to his words, his jaw clenching as the spoon paused halfway to his lips, a faint wince crossing his face at the very mention of this incident. Enough, Leo said after a brief pause. I don't want to confront this problem at the moment, Chaosbringer. On to the next subject. He requested, as Chaosbringer hesitated visibly for a heartbeat. For a brief moment, he weighed his words, considering whether to warn his lord that postponing such an important matter could allow suspicion to fester, which was not optimal for the cult at this juncture. However, in the end, he simply lowered his gaze slightly and nodded. As you wish, my lord. He acceded before turning the page. Flip. My lord, Cult Master Soren is dead and the people wish to hold a mourning ceremony in his honor. He shared, as Leo's grip tightened subtly against the blanket, his eyes lowering. As per cult tradition, 3 days after the mourning, your ascension ceremony as the next cult master must be held, Chaosbringer continued. If you believe yourself recovered enough, I can begin preparations immediately. He explained, as Leo remained silent for several seconds before responding. I will attend the mourning ceremony, he said. That much is not negotiable. He drew a slow breath. However, delay the ascension ceremony by 1 week. For that's the minimum period of mourning a man as great as Soren deserves. Leo added, as Chaosbringer rose from his seat and bowed deeply. It will be arranged, he added, before returning to his chair as he moved to the next document. Flip. My lord, regarding the gentleman's agreement you have with the dragon Multheric to protect the cult, Chaosbringer began. It seems like all initial attempts to establish contact have failed from our side. He informed, as Leo let out a tired sigh, before leaning back against the pillows and pinching the bridge of his nose. Pinch. He has ignored every indirect summons and communication attempt made so far. And with how unpredictable he is, it seems like the only one who can potentially get through to him is you. Which also means, securing his allegiance is yet another matter that must be left solely to you. Chaosbringer informed, as Leo nodded slowly in acknowledgement. I expected as much. The Shadow Dragon said, as Chaosbringer set the documents aside, his expression growing more serious, as he pulled up a new set. My lord, the final matter is the most urgent. He began, as Leo met his gaze sharply. With Lord Soren dead, the state of the current cult of Ascension is chaotic and restless. Many are unsure whether they should remain hidden within the time-stilled world indefinitely, or whether the success of the operation to retrieve Aegon Ver means the cult can safely re-enter the wider universe. He paused. At present, the cult lacks direction. Morale is unstable, and anxiety is spreading rapidly. If left unchecked, this unrest could become volatile. The room fell quiet. Amanda gently placed the empty bowl aside as Leo stared at the ceiling, the weight of Soren's death pressing down on him in ways no injury ever had. I understand, Leo said softly. Chaosbringer inclined his head. The cult needs to hear from you, he added. They need a new identity, and a clear purpose to move toward. You don't necessarily need to address the masses via a live speech, and can even pass on a recorded message from your bed. However, what is important is that you do address them. Chaosbringer stressed, as Leo closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Give me 1 day, he said. I will address them personally after that. He committed, as Chaosbringer stood and bowed once more. As you command, my lord, he said before turning to leave, as Leo's gaze lingered on the ceiling. His thoughts heavy and unresolved, as he decided on how he wanted to run the cult next. I guess, I am technically the cult master now. Not just in duty, but in name as well. The Cult of Ascension is now my organization. Leo thought, as he felt his heart beat just a tad bit faster at the thought, as though becoming sect master gave him both anxiety and thrill at the same time. But how will I shape them? Do I use them to break the wheel of history and try to usher humanity into a new golden age? Or do I fear karma, and try to live a simpler life instead? He wondered, as for a while, no clear answer came to his head, the pros and cons of both paths weighing heavily on his mind. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.